He lowered the rifle the moment he saw the small gray hand hanging over the wagon boards. Caleb Whitaker rode out to catch a thief and found a barefoot widow bleeding from a rope harness, dragging her starving children across his land because she'd rather bleed than beg. "Shoot me if you have to," she said, "but my children get water first." What she was really running from would break this broken man wide open. If this moves you, subscribe and stay to the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Caleb Whitaker found the empty grain sack before he found the woman. He'd counted his stores twice that morning. Corn gone dried, meat gone a good canteen, missing off the hook by the smokehouse door. A man didn't ranch alone in West Texas for 11 years without learning the difference between a mouse and a thief. This was a thief. Two-legged, hungry, and gone by moonlight. So he saddled the roan, took the rifle down off the pegs, and rode out under a sun already mean at 8 in the morning. He expected to find a drifter, maybe a runaway hand looking to trade stolen goods 2 counties over. He rehearsed what he'd say, the cold, flat words a man used when he meant them. "Drop it. Turn around. You'll answer to the sheriff in Bitter Fork." He did not expect the sound. It came to him before he crested the low rise, a dragging, grinding scrape wood on rock, and under it, something worse. A rhythm. Breath forced out through clenched teeth. The noise a body made when it had decided to keep going long after it had any right to. Caleb reined up at the top of the rise and looked down. A wagon sat crooked in the wash below, one wheel half buried, the tongue splintered where a horse should have been and wasn't. And in front of it, bent nearly double, a woman, hauled against a rope harness, cinched across her shoulders. Barefoot. Her dress the color of old dust, torn at the hem, torn at the sleeve. She leaned into that rope the way an ox leans into a yoke, one slow step, then another, her heels digging trenches in the dirt. The rope had cut her. He could see it even from up there. Dark lines soaking through the cloth at her shoulders, where the fibers had ground into skin. Caleb sat his horse a long moment. Then he brought the rifle up across the saddle and started down. She heard him at 40 feet. Her head came up. She stopped hauling, and the wagon rolled back an inch and settled, and she turned to face him with the rope still biting into her. "Stop right there," Caleb said. She stopped, but not the way the guilty stop. She stopped like a wall stops, planted, squared, chin up. "You're on Whitaker land," he said. "That's my corn in that wagon. My meat. My canteen you got tied to your belt." The woman looked at the rifle. She looked at his face. Her lips were cracked white and split down the middle, and her eyes were the burnt-out red of somebody who hadn't cried in days because the water for it was long gone. "I know whose it is," she said. "Then you know what you are." "I know what you'd call me." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Step away from the wagon." "No." The word landed flat between them. He'd have shot a man for less or thought about it, and here was this woman half his weight and barely upright telling him no with a rifle pointed at her chest. "Ma'am," he said, and the word came out harder than the situation. "I said step away, and I said no. Ma'am, I've got a rifle. I've got eyes. I can see the rifle." She said it like she was tired of the rifle, tired of every man who'd ever pointed one at her. "You going to use it, or you going to keep telling me it's there? You'd stand there and let me shoot you. I'd stand here and make you decide what kind of man does that to a woman in a rope harness." She hitched the rope higher on her raw shoulder and winced, and did not look away from him. "Shoot me if you have to, mister. But my children are in that wagon, and I am not stopping until one of them gets water." For a second, Caleb didn't move. Then past the crack of the splintered wagon side, he saw the small hand. It hung out over the boards, palm up, fingers curled loose, the way a sleeping child's fingers curl. Except this hand was too still and too gray, and the wrist above it was thin as a green stick. A little girl's hand. Caleb lowered the rifle. He didn't decide to. His arm decided for him. "How many?" he said. His voice had changed, and he heard it change. The woman's chin trembled once, and she locked it down. "2. My boy and my girl. And my mother." A breath. My mother's the reason I stopped at your place. She's got a cut on her leg gone bad. I needed water to clean it, and I had nothing to buy with, and I wasn't going to knock on a stranger's door at midnight and beg. So I took. She said it plain, no shame in it, and no pleading. I took your corn and your meat and your canteen. You want to hang me for it, there's a good branch 2 miles back. But you'll water my children first, or you'll have to shoot me to stop me. Caleb swung down off the roan. Don't, she said, and for the first time her voice cracked. She stepped between him and the wagon, and her hand went behind her fumbling and came up with a kitchen knife worn thin as a leaf. She held it out in front of her, shaking. Don't you touch them. He stood still. He kept his hands where she could see them. Lady, he said, I'm not going to touch your children. Men say that. I'm not going to touch your children, he said again slower, because I'm going to give them water. Now put that down before you cut your own hand off. She didn't put it down. But she didn't lunge either. She stood there heaving for breath, the knife wobbling in the space between them, and Caleb saw her deciding whether he was one more thing come to take from her. He'd seen livestock make that same calculation cornered, deciding whether to run through a man or die trying. He reached slow to his belt, unhooked his own canteen, full heavy, and held it out to her by the strap. Yours is empty, he said. You stole it dry 2 days ago, I'd guess. This one's got a gallon. Give it to your girl. The knife came down an inch. Go on, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She snatched the canteen out of his hand like she thought he'd pull it back. Then she turned and scrambled up over the wagon wheel, dropping the knife in the dirt behind her. Forgetting it. Forgetting him. Forgetting everything but the small gray hand. Caleb picked the knife up. He looked at it. A woman had come at him with a butter knife to keep him off her babies. He set it careful on the wagon seat where she'd find it, and then he climbed up the other side and looked into the wagon bed, and something in him that had been welded shut for 11 years took a hairline crack. There were 2 children in there. The girl was maybe 6. Her lips were the same cracked white as her mother's, and her eyes had the glassy, half-lidded look Caleb knew that he'd prayed over a decade back on a straw mattress in a room he'd since nailed shut. The woman had the girl's head in her lap and was dripping water onto her lips. 1 drop, 2, waiting 3, 4. Her whole body bent over that tiny slack face. Lily, the woman was saying. Lily girl, you drink now. You drink for mama. Don't you go to sleep on me. You drink. The boy sat against the far side. Older 9-10. He had a rifle across his knees, an old single shot, and he'd raised it the second Caleb's shadow fell across him. His hands were steady. That was the thing Caleb would remember. A boy that age, starved down to nothing, and his hands didn't shake at all. Get away from my mama, the boy said. Samuel. The woman didn't look up. Put it down. He's got a rifle, Mama. He gave us water. Put it down. The boy didn't put it down. He kept it leveled at Caleb's chest, and his jaw was set exactly like his mother's, and Caleb understood he was looking at the man of this family 10 years old, holding the line the only way he knew. Son, Caleb said quietly, your sister needs both your mama's hands. You keep that gun on me if you want. But there's a woman back of you needs looking at, and your mama can't be 2 places. That was when Caleb saw the third one. The old woman lay in the front of the bed wrapped in a quilt gone stiff with old sweat, and the smell came off her like a warning. Caleb knew that smell. Sweet and rotten under the dust, the smell of a wound that had turned the smell of flesh, giving up. Her leg was propped on a rolled coat, and the rag around her calf was soaked black. Her eyes were open, fever bright, fixed on him. You the rancher, she said. Her voice was a thread. Whitaker. Yes, ma'am. She told you she stole. The old woman's mouth moved into something that might have been a smile in a better year. She'd rather you thought her a thief than a beggar. My Abigail, proud as a fence post. Mother, hush. I'll hush when I'm dead, which by the smell of my own leg won't be long. The old woman's fever eyes came back to Caleb and sharpened. You've got a choice to make, mister, and you'd best make it fast, because there are men behind us who'd shoot all four of us to get what I'm carrying, and they don't care one lick whose land they do it on." Caleb looked from the old woman to the mother, to the boy with his steady rifle, to the little girl taking water one drop at a time. "Who's behind you?" he said. Nobody answered. The mother Abigail pressed another drop to Lily's lips. "I asked who's behind you." "Silas Vane," the old woman said. The name settled into the wagon bed like a cold thing. Caleb saw the boy's steady hands go tight on the rifle. He saw Abigail's shoulders draw up around her ears. Caleb knew the name. Everybody from Bitter Fork to the Pecos knew the name. Silas Vane owned cattle, owned land, owned the paper on half the failing homesteads in the county, and owned folks said low when they said it at all, the sheriff's good behavior. Caleb had shaken the man's hand once at a stock auction and gone home and washed it. "What's a cattle baron want with a widow and 3—" He stopped. "You're a widow. 2 years, Abigail said. She still hadn't looked at him. "My husband broke his back off a windmill tower working Vane's water rights. Vane sent a preacher to the funeral and a bill to the house. Said Thomas owed him 3 years' wages, advanced against a debt I never saw signed." Her voice was flat, worn smooth, a story she'd told herself 100 nights. "I couldn't read the paper. I made my mark where they told me. Turned out I signed my land to him and my children after it." "That's not law," Caleb said. "It's his law." She finally looked up, and her burnt red eyes found his. "You know how many widows in this county made their mark on a paper they couldn't read? You know how many are gone now, land and all, working his kitchens to pay a debt that grows every month, no matter what they pay?" Caleb didn't answer. He knew. He'd wondered about it the lazy way a man wonders about a thing that isn't happening to him. "My mother taught school," Abigail said. "She can read. She read his real ledger." "Abigail." The old woman's thread of a voice sharpened again. "Don't. He needs to know why they're coming, Mother. If he's going to leave us out here, he ought to know what he's leaving us to." She turned back to Caleb. She copied it. Names, numbers. What folks paid, and what he wrote down they paid. Widows he cheated. Wages he stole. 2 children he took as debt collateral last spring, and where he sent them. She said it, and her voice did not break, and that was somehow worse than if it had. "That's what's in this wagon, mister, not just your corn. The one thing in this county that could hang Silas Vane. And he knows we've got it." For a long moment nobody spoke. The little girl swallowed, actually swallowed a small wet sound, and Abigail's breath caught, and she bent and pressed her lips to the child's hot forehead, and whispered something Caleb didn't try to hear. Caleb climbed back down off the wagon. He stood in the dirt with the sun coming down on the back of his neck, and he thought about the room in his house he kept nailed shut. He thought about a straw mattress and a woman's hand going slack in his, and a fever he couldn't break with all the well water in Texas. He thought about the small pine box, and the smaller one beside it, and the 11 years he'd spent since teaching himself not to look at either. He thought right away. It's not your fight. You caught a thief, and the thief had a sad story, and the world is full of sad stories, and Silas Vane is not a man you cross. Then he looked at the rope harness lying in the dirt, where Abigail had shrugged out of it, the rope she'd cut her own shoulders raw, dragging her dying family across his land because she'd rather bleed than beg. Caleb walked to the front of the wagon. He took out his knife. Abigail's head came up sharp. "What are you—" He cut the harness rope off the wagon tongue with 2 hard strokes and threw it in the dust. Then he went to the roan, unbuckled the traces off his own saddle rig, and started backing the horse toward the broken tongue. "Mister," Abigail had come up onto her knees holding the wagon side. "What are you doing? Your tongue's split, but it'll hold if I splint it and go slow." He didn't look at her while he worked. His hands were busy and steady. "It's 9 miles to Bitter Fork. Doc Bell's got a house at the near end of town. Good man blunt as a hammer doesn't scare. He'll see to your mother's leg and get water into that little girl proper. I can't pay a doctor, I told you. I've got nothing." "Didn't ask you to pay a doctor." "Then why—" Her voice snagged. "Why would you do this? An hour ago, you had a gun on me." Caleb cinched the last buckle. Then he turned and looked at her kneeling there in her torn dress with her raw shoulders and her burnt-out eyes, and he gave her the truth in the only size he had it. "Because I know that smell," he said. "The one coming off your mother. I know it, and I know what comes after it, and I buried what came after it in my own ground a long time back." He looked away out at the shimmer on the flats. "You stole my food. All right. Now I'm taking you to town before this land steals the rest of you." Abigail stared at him. The old woman from the wagon bed let out a long breath that might have been the closest she'd come to weeping in a while. "Samuel," Caleb said, "you can put that rifle down now, son, or you can keep it up and shoot me 9 miles to town. Either way, climb up front. I'll need somebody to hand your grandmother water while I drive." The boy looked at his mother. Abigail nodded. Slow, watchful, never quite lowering his eyes, Samuel set the old rifle down and climbed over the seat. And when he settled beside Caleb, his shoulder came up against the man's arm for half a second before the boy caught himself and pulled straight. And Caleb felt that half second like a hand pressed flat against the nailed-shut door inside him. He clucked the roan forward. The wagon groaned, shuddered, and rolled. They made a mile that way. Then, too, the splinted tongue holding Lily. Taking water, the old woman muttering ledger numbers under her fever, like a woman saying her prayers. Abigail rode in the bed with her daughter's head in her lap and watched the back of Caleb's neck and said nothing, because there was nothing. Yet she trusted herself to say to a man who kept surprising her. It was Samuel who spoke. "Mr. Whitaker?" "Caleb's fine." The boy considered that like it was a gift he wasn't sure he was allowed to take. "Caleb." He watched the horse's ears. "Are the bad men gonna take my mama?" Caleb didn't lie to him. He'd have wanted the truth at that age. He figured the boy was owed it. "There's men who want to," he said. "That's the honest answer. But you got a mama who dragged 3 people across a desert with a rope, and now you got me, and I don't ride past a thing twice in one day. So you keep your grandmother watered, and you keep your eyes forward, and we'll get where we're going." Samuel nodded, small and serious. He handed a drop of water back to the old woman's lips. "My pa used to drive us," he said after a while. "Before the windmill." Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "I expect he was a good driver." He was. The boy's voice wobbled just once, then flattened out into that too-old steadiness again. "I don't much remember his face anymore. Mama says that's all right. She says the forgetting's just the sadness leaving room for other things." Caleb's hands tightened on the lines. "Your mama," he said, "is a wiser woman than she lets on." They rode on a while. The boy's eyes started to droop despite himself chin-dipping toward his chest, and Caleb reached over without looking and steadied him with a hand on the shoulder so he wouldn't pitch off the seat. "Lie down in the back," Caleb said. "I'll watch the road. Your grandmother's quiet now." Samuel wanted to argue. Caleb watched him want to. But the boy was 10, and he was empty, and the seat was hard, and after a minute he climbed back over into the bed and curled against his sister, and Abigail pulled a corner of quilt over both of them without a word. Then it was just the two of them awake, Caleb up front, and Abigail in the bed behind him, and the wagon rolling, and the sun leaning down. "You had a wife," Abigail said. It wasn't a question. Caleb kept his eyes on the horse's ears. "I did. And a child. A daughter." "How old?" 14 months. He hadn't said the number out loud in years. It came out rusty. "Her name was Ellen. My wife was Mary. The fever came through in the spring of '73 and took them both inside a week, and I've been on that ranch alone every day since." He flicked the lines. "That's the whole of it. Don't ask me the rest because there isn't any rest. That's where the story stops." Abigail was quiet a moment. "You keep their room shut up," she said. Caleb's shoulders went still. "I don't have to see your house to know it," she said, gentler now. "My mother did the same after my father. Nailed the door and lived around it 11 years like the room was a grave in the middle of the floor, and she just walked wide of it every day of her life." She looked down at her sleeping children. "That's no way to live, Mr. Whitaker. I mean to say it kindly, but it's no way to live. You're a fine one to lecture on living. Caleb said harder than he meant. "You're the one hauling a wagon into the dirt with a rope." "I'm hauling it toward something," Abigail said. "There's a difference between a woman dragging her family toward a chance and a man sitting still in a locked-up house so nothing can ever hurt him again. One of those is grief. The other's just fear wearing grief's coat." Caleb didn't answer that. He couldn't. She'd reached into him and set her hand flat on the exact place, and she didn't even know the shape of the room she'd named. "You always talk to men who point guns at you like this," he said finally. For the first time, something almost like a smile crossed Abigail's cracked mouth. "You put the gun down an hour ago. Been trying to figure you out ever since." She shifted Lily's head on her lap. "A cruel man doesn't give up his own canteen. A cold one doesn't splint a stranger's wagon in the noon heat. So you're not either of those. But you're something. A man doesn't nail a door shut unless there's a reason. I'm just trying to know what kind of reason I've put my children in a wagon with." "Good kind," Caleb said. "That's all you need to know. I'll be the judge of what I need to know about the man driving my babies." "Fair," Caleb said, and left it. They rode. The heat pressed down. And after a while, Abigail spoke again, so low he almost lost it under the wheels. "Thank you," she said, "for the water. She wasn't swallowing before. My Lily. She wasn't swallowing anymore, and I had nothing left to put in her, and I kept thinking I'd take one more step, and somewhere at the end of the steps there'd be water, and I didn't know where. I just knew I couldn't stop or she'd—" She broke off, straightened her spine, locked it all back down the way Caleb was starting to understand she locked everything down. "Anyway, thank you." "You don't thank a man for water in this country," Caleb said. "You just remember it and you pass it on." They came up out of the wash and onto the flat where the road ran straight for town, and Caleb let the roan find its own slow pace, and for the space of maybe half a mile, it was almost quiet, almost bearable, the wagon rolling, and the boy sleeping, and the woman breathing behind him. Then the old woman stopped muttering her numbers. "Abigail," she said. Something in the way she said it turned Caleb around in the seat. Ruth Mercer had pushed herself up on one elbow in the wagon bed, and she wasn't looking at her daughter or her grandchildren. She was looking back the way they'd come past the tailboard out at the road behind them. Caleb followed her eyes. Far off low against the hard blue, a smear of tan was rising off the flats. It hung and thickened and moved, and it did not move the way dust moves when the wind pushes it. It moved the way dust moves when it's being kicked up from under. Fast. Coming on. Riders. Abigail turned. She saw it. Her arms came down around Lily and drew the child up tight against her chest, and her burnt-out eyes went to Caleb's face and held there asking a question she wouldn't put into words in front of her son. Caleb Whitaker looked at the dust a moment longer. Then he faced front, took the lines up short in his fists, and spoke low and even the way a man speaks when he has already made up his mind and is only now finding out what it cost. "Samuel," he said, "wake up now. Water your grandmother, then get down low in the bed with your sister, and don't you sit up again till I tell you to." Samuel didn't argue this time. He came up out of sleep like a soldier, blinked once at the dust behind them, and understood everything without being told. He put the canteen to Ruth's lips, waited for her to drink, then flattened himself in the wagon bed with his arm across Lily. "How far back?" Abigail said. Her voice had gone quiet and hard. "Half a mile, maybe less." Caleb slapped the lines. The roan lunged into the traces, and the wagon jerked forward, wheels screaming over the ruts. "How many men does Vane ride with?" 4, 5. Abigail braced herself against the sideboard, holding Lily's head off the boards. "He doesn't do his own work. He never does his own work." "Then he's got a foreman doing it." "Dutch Reller. He carries a shotgun and a smile, and I've never seen him use the smile on anybody who deserved it." Caleb looked at the road ahead. Straight and open for 2 more miles. Then the town. On a good horse, with an empty wagon, he'd make it. With a split tongue and a dying woman, and a wheel he could hear starting to complain, he would not. "We can't outrun them on this road," he said. "Then what?" "There's a dry wash cuts north half a mile up. Runs behind the Pruitt place and comes out past the schoolhouse at the edge of town. It's rough. It'll shake this wagon to pieces. He was already turning the roan's head. But they can't ride 5 abreast down a wash. They'll have to come single and single I can hold. Hold with what? You've got 1 rifle. I've got 1 rifle and a reason, Caleb said. That's more than most of Vane's men brought. The wagon left the road hard, dropping off the shoulder into the scrub, and Ruth cried out as the jolt went through her bad leg. Abigail got a hand under her mother's head. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry. Hold on. Don't you dare slow down for me. Ruth's voice was thin, but it cut. You slow down for me and I will haunt you, Abigail Mercer. Get that paper to a lawman who doesn't answer to Silas Vane. That's all I'm good for now. That paper and my 2 eyes. You're good for more than that. Not today, I'm not. The wash opened up in front of them, a scar of packed sand and rock running between 2 low banks, and Caleb took the roan down into it at a speed that was more prayer than sense. The wagon slammed and bucked. Behind them, the sound of hoofbeats on the hard road changed, slowed, milled, then came on again, angrier, funneling down into the wash after them. They've seen us, Samuel called from the bed. He'd lifted his head an inch. Caleb, they've turned in. Down, son. I can count them for you. Down. The boy went down, but not before he'd said it 4. And one of 'em's way out ahead of the others. He's gaining, Caleb. He's gaining fast. Caleb didn't turn. He didn't have to. He could hear it now under the wagon screaming, a single horse ridden hard and reckless, closing the gap the others were too smart to close in loose footing. One man who wanted to be first to the wagon. One man Vane could point at a thing and trust to run it down. Abigail, that rider coming up alone. You know his horse? She twisted to look back past the tailboard. Whatever she saw took a second to sit down in her, and when it did, her voice came out changed thinner, older, like something had reached back 2 years and touched her. That's Curtis Hale. Friend of yours. He was my husband's friend. She was still staring back. He carried the front of Thomas's coffin. He ate at my table the night before we buried him. He held Samuel on his knee. Her arms tightened around her children. And now he's riding point for the man that killed us slow. Caleb heard the whole shape of it in 3 sentences. He'd seen it before. A hard land didn't only starve people, it bought them. Samuel, Caleb said, hand me the rifle up from the bed, slow, butt first. The boy passed it up. Caleb kept the lines in his left fist and brought the rifle across his lap with his right, and when the single rider came around, the last kink of the wash, closed now 60 feet. Curtis Hale bent low with a pistol already drawn. Caleb didn't aim for the man. He aimed 3 feet over the man's hat and fired. The shot cracked off the banks and doubled and tripled down the wash, and Curtis Hale's horse threw its head and shied hard into the sand, and for a few seconds there was nothing but a man fighting his own mount in a narrow place. It was all Caleb wanted. He wanted the gap back. He wanted Hale to remember he could die today. Curtis Hale. Abigail was up on her knees now, shouting back over the tailboard, and there was no fear in it, only a grief so old it had gone hard as a stone. You look at what you're chasing. It's Thomas's children, Curtis. It's the boy you dandled. You point that gun at Samuel, and you tell me what Thomas would say to you at the gate of heaven. Haley got his horse under him, but he didn't come on. He sat there in the wash 60 feet back, his pistol hand dropping slow to his side, and Caleb reloading one-handed, not slowing the wagon. A hair understood that Abigail had just done with 3 sentences what a bullet couldn't. She'd made the man remember who he'd been before Vane's wages. That won't hold him long, Caleb said quietly. No, Abigail agreed. But shame's a slower horse than money. It'll cost him the next mile at least. Caleb drove. The wash narrowed, and the banks rose, and the roan's breath came in great tearing pulls, and every few seconds the whole wagon lurched sideways as a wheel found a rock. Abigail had stopped talking. She'd wrapped herself around both children and set her back to the tailboard, so that if anything came through, it would come through her first, and Caleb saw her do it, and felt the old nailed-shut door take another crack. Abigail! What? The paper. Where is it? A pause. Why? Because if this goes bad, I need to know it's somewhere they won't look first. Not on your mother. She's the first thing they'll grab. Silence. 3 seconds, the wagon screaming under them. It's sewn into Lily's rag doll, Abigail said. The seam up the back. Nobody searches a sick child's toy. Caleb almost laughed. He didn't have the wind for it. Your mother teach you that too. My mother taught me everything worth knowing, and most of it the hard way. The wash bent left. Caleb took the bend, and the near wheel climbed the bank, and for 1/6 second the whole wagon tipped 2 wheels off the ground. Ruth sliding Abigail, grabbing Lily's head, lolling, and then it came down with a crash that split something in the undercarriage, a long, tearing crack, and the wagon settled, listing hard to the right and would not roll straight anymore. Wheel's gone, Caleb said. It's not gone, it's turning. The hub's cracked. It'll turn till it doesn't, and then it'll come off. He looked back. The dust of the riders had rounded the far bend 400 yards closing. We're not making town in this wagon. Not now. Then we run, Abigail said. Give me Lily, I'll carry her, Samuel can. Samuel can't outrun a horse, and neither can you, and neither can your mother. Caleb's voice stayed flat and even, the voice of a man doing arithmetic he hated. Listen to me. There's 4 of them, and 1 of me, and they'll be on us before you clear the bank. We don't run. We stop, and we make them talk, and we buy time with words until I can figure out how to buy it with something better. You can't reason with Silas Vane. I'm not going to reason with him. Caleb hauled back on the lines, and the ruined wagon groaned to a stop across the width of the wash, blocking it. He set the brake. Then he took up the rifle, levered around into it, and climbed down slow into the sand. I'm going to make him do arithmetic too. He walked 10 paces back down the wash toward the coming dust, and stopped there, and stood with the rifle held low across his body, not raised, not hidden. A man who meant to be seen deciding. The riders came around the last bend and pulled up in a spray of grit 40 feet off. There were 4, like Abigail had said, and Caleb marked them the way he'd mark cattle at auction, which one would break, which one would fight, which one was just drawing wages. 2 of them were hired guns, hard and bored. The third was a big man with a shotgun laid across his saddle and a smile already working, and Caleb didn't have to be told that was Dutch Reller. The 4th man sat a little apart on a gray gelding, and he did not look hard or bored or amused. He looked like a banker who'd come to foreclose and expected the paperwork to be in order. Clean coat. Clean hands. A face that had never once in its life been surprised by anything it couldn't buy. And behind them, hanging back at the bend, half in the shadow of the bank, sat Curtis Hale on his blown horse, not riding up with the others, not riding away, caught in the exact middle of himself where Abigail's words had left him. Caleb marked that too. A man in the middle of himself could fall either way. It paid to know where the loose stone was in a wall you might have to lean on. Mr. Whitaker, Silas Vane said. He said it pleasantly. I don't believe we've had cause to speak since the Delwood auction. You bought that roan there off me, as I recall. Fine animal. I'd hate to see it shot out from under you over another man's trouble. It's not another man's trouble anymore, Caleb said. It's on my land, and now it's on my road, and that makes it mine. It's on a public right-of-way, and the trouble in that wagon is a matter of law. Vane's voice never rose. That was the thing about it. It never had to. That woman is Abigail Mercer. She owes my estate a lawful debt. She has fled that debt, and she has taken with her property that belongs to me, and there is a warrant sworn out in Bitterfork this very morning for her arrest and the recovery of that property. Sheriff Pike is bringing it out behind me. You are standing, Mr. Whitaker, between a lawman and a fugitive. I'd think hard about that. Behind Caleb from the wagon, Abigail's voice came sharp and clear. The property he wants is my children, Caleb. Ask him. Ask him what property. Vane didn't so much as glance at her. Collateral is collateral, Mrs. Mercer. You signed. I made a mark on a page you read to me wrong. You signed. Say it plain, Caleb said. You want her boy and her girl. That's the property. 2 children as payment on a debt you invented. For the first time, something moved behind Vane's banker's calm. Not shame. Caleb saw that right off, but irritation, the annoyance of a man made to state out loud a thing he preferred to keep in ledgers. The law provides for the labor of dependence against unsecured debt. It's ugly. I didn't write it. I merely use it as any man of business would. He let his gaze travel over the broken wagon, the listing wheel the shape of Ruth under the quilt. You've a fondness for these people you've known half a day. I respect a soft heart, Whitaker, truly. But a soft heart doesn't hold land. And you've a good deal of land, haven't you? 2,000 acres of the best grass south of the Concho. A man alone. No sons. No wife. A pause delicate as a blade. There was a wife, wasn't there? And a little girl. 73 the fever year. I looked into you before I rode out, Mr. Whitaker. I look into everything before I ride out. So I know precisely how much a man like you has left to lose, and I'll tell you plainly, it's nothing. Which is why you should ride home. A man with nothing left has no business dying for strangers on my account. Caleb had thought he was ready for anything Vane could say. He was wrong. Hearing the man lay Mary and Ellen out on the table like 2 more line items, looked into priced filed, did something to Caleb that the rifle hadn't. It didn't shake him. It set him. You just made a mistake, Caleb said very quietly. Did I? You reminded me what I don't have. See, most men you dig up their dead to scare 'em. But a man's already lost everything, can't be scared with a shovel. You just handed me the last thing I needed. Caleb's voice didn't rise either. He'd learned that from a man like Vane years back, and now he gave it back. You told me I've got nothing to protect, so there's nothing you can take to make me back down. Thank you for that. Truly. Dutch, Vane said. Get the woman and the property. Leave Mr. Whitaker his dignity. Dutch Reller swung down off his horse, still smiling, the shotgun coming up easy. Caleb raised the rifle. He didn't point it at Reller. He pointed it at Silas Vane, and he held it dead steady, and the whole wash went quiet, except for the roan blowing and a fly working somewhere and the sound of a little girl's shallow breathing behind him. First man to touch that wagon, Caleb said. Won't get to watch what happens next because you'll already be dead, Vane. Not Dutch. Not the boys. You. Now I've never shot a man who wasn't shooting first. But I buried my wife and my daughter in ground you never worked and never bled for, and I have got exactly nothing left in this world that a man like you can threaten me with. You understand what I'm telling you? You've got no lever on me. There's no debt you can call. There's nobody left for you to take. That makes me the most dangerous man you'll meet this year because I don't want anything you've got. Dutch Reller had stopped. His smile had stopped with him. He was looking at Vane waiting, and Vane was looking at the rifle and doing arithmetic. You'd hang, Vane said quietly. I'd hang after you were buried. That's a trade I can live with. Question is, whether it's one you can. The seconds stretched. One of the hired guns eased a hand toward his belt, and Caleb's eyes flicked to him, and the hand stopped. Curtis. Abigail's voice, quieter now, aimed past the whole standoff at the one man hanging back at the bend. You don't have to be here. Thomas would take you back. Even after this. He was that kind. You know he was. Curtis Hale didn't answer. But his hand came off his pistol grip and settled on his own thigh, and he stared at the sand between his horse's ears like a man who couldn't find his own name. Hale, Vane said without turning his head. You're paid through the month. I know it. Hale said. It came out rough, the first thing he'd said. Then earn it. Hale didn't move, and into that teetering quiet where 4 armed men and 1 rancher and 1 dying schoolteacher all hung on which way a single ashamed man would fall, the little girl woke. Lily stirred against her mother, her eyes cracking open, and she took in the horses and the guns, the way a fevered child takes in a nightmare she can't be sure is real, and she began to cry. Not loud. She didn't have loud in her. A thin, cracked, terrible little sound. Mama, are these the bad horses? Hush, baby, Mama's here. Is it the bad horses that took our house? Nobody in that wash was hard enough to hear it clean. Caleb watched Dutch Reller's jaw work. He watched one of the hired guns find something to study down the wash. And he watched Curtis Hale shut his eyes. And into that silence from the wagon came a voice that had no business having any strength left in it. Silas Vane. Ruth Mercer had dragged herself up. She was hanging over the tailboard, gray-faced, her bad leg trailing, and in her fist she held a sheaf of folded paper. Not the sewn copy, Caleb realized, but a second-set decoy, or reel. He couldn't tell, and it didn't matter, because she held it up in the sunlight where every man could see it. "You know what this is," Ruth said. "You've been chasing it 3 days. Names and numbers in my own hand. Elias Turnbull's widow cheated of 40 acres. The Doakes children that you sent to the Rutherford Mill in Fort Worth, that their mother still doesn't know, are alive. Your own foreman's Mark forging Thomas Mercer's signature on a note dated 2 weeks after Thomas was in the ground." She was breathing in tearing gulps between the words, and she got them all out anyway. "I copied every line, Silas, and I did not carry the only copy into the desert like a fool. There's a second set already gone east. Rode out yesterday morning with a man you don't know, headed for the federal judge in Austin. You can kill all 4 of us right here in this wash, and it will not stop that paper. It will only be 4 more names for the judge to read." Silence. Caleb watched Vane's face and saw the arithmetic go wrong for him. Saw the exact second the numbers stopped adding up the way he wanted, because there was no way for him to know if the old woman was lying, and a man like Vane had built everything he owned on never being the one who didn't know. "You're bluffing," Vane said, but he said it a half-second too late, and everyone in the wash heard the half-second. "Maybe," Ruth said. "You want to bet your estate on maybe you, who never made a bet in your life you hadn't already fixed." Caleb pressed it. He'd found the crack, and he drove into it. "Here's how it goes, Vane. You ride back to town right now, and you meet the sheriff and you tell him you were mistaken, that Mrs. Mercer's debt is under review pending an audit of your books. Because there is going to be an audit. And when the judge in Austin opens his mail, the only thing that'll save your neck is that on this one day in this one wash, you chose not to add murder to fraud. That's the offer. That's my offer to you. Ride home. Nobody will remember you were here." He gave Vane his own words back and watched them land. For a long moment, Silas Vane looked at Caleb Whitaker over the barrel of the rifle, and Caleb saw the calculation finish and saw the man decide. "Dutch," Vane said. "Mount up." "Boss, mount up." Vane gathered his gray's reins unhurried, restoring his face to its banker's calm, one muscle at a time. "There'll be a lawful accounting. In a courtroom, where it belongs." His eyes came back to Caleb, and for one instant the calm slipped, and something underneath it showed through, cold and patient, and entirely without a bottom. "You've made a poor investment today, Whitaker. I have never once lost money on a poor investment. I simply wait. Land comes due. Men come due. You will come due." He touched his hat, the mockery of a gentleman. "Give my regards to the doctor. Mrs. Mercer's mother won't last the week by the look of that leg, and a dead witness signs nothing." He turned the gray and rode back down the wash, and 2 of his men fell in behind him. Dutch Reller last, walking his horse backward 3 steps, so his smile could stay pointed at Caleb until the bend took him. But Curtis Hale did not go. He sat his blown horse in the middle of the wash, while the others rode out, and when the dust of them had thinned, he walked the animal forward, slow, both hands where Caleb could see them, and stopped 10 feet off. He didn't look at Caleb. He looked at Abigail, and then at the small shape of Lily in her arms. And then he made himself look at the boy standing in the wagon bed with his fists knotted, the boy he'd once held on his knee. "Abby." His voice had gone to gravel. "I ain't going to ask you to forgive it. I know better than to ask that." "Then don't," Abigail said. "Not cruel, just done." "I won't," he swallowed. "But I'll tell you a true thing, because it's the only coin I've got left that's worth anything. That warrant Vane spoke of, it's real. Pike swore it out this morning, and Pike's coming, and Pike is not a bad man. But he is a frightened one, and Vane owns his fear the way he owns his cattle." Hale's eyes finally came up to Caleb. He'll ride straight to whatever hole you go to ground in. Doc Bell's most like there's nowhere else in Bitter Fork for a woman that sick. So whatever you mean to do, mister, you'd best have it half done before that badge comes up the street. Because Pike scared will do a cruel thing to feel safe. I know. I'm looking at what I did to feel safe. Then Curtis Hale touched his hat to Abigail, the gesture of a man at a graveside, and turned his horse, and rode out the way the others had gone, but slower and alone, a man who'd bought his soul back at the price of his wages, and didn't yet know how he'd eat. Caleb watched him to the bend. You believe him? About the warrant, yes. Abigail's arms were still full of her daughter. Curtis lied for 2 years about the man he'd become, but he never once lied to me about Thomas or about danger. That much of him Vane couldn't buy. Then they were gone, all of them, and the dust hung and settled, and the wash was quiet. Caleb lowered the rifle. His arms had gone to iron, holding it steady, and now they shook, and he let them, because there was nobody to see but a woman who'd held a knife on him that morning and had earned the right. They'll be back, Abigail said. She hadn't moved from the wagon. Her arms were still around her children. Not today. Today he's got to go arrange his story before we arrange ours. Caleb turned around. Your mother just saved all our lives. You know that. That bluff about Austin. He stopped. Ruth Mercer was no longer hanging over the tailboard. She'd slid back into the wagon bed, the sheaf of paper loose in her open hand, her head fallen against the sideboard at an angle a conscious person doesn't hold. Mama. Abigail was over her in an instant. Mama, Mama, they're gone. You did it, you can... She got a hand to the old woman's face. Mama. Ruth's eyes were half open. Her chest moved, but wrong, too shallow, too quick, a bird's breathing. She spent it all, Caleb said low. Everything she had left, she spent it on that bluff. He was already moving. Was it a bluff, the second copy, Austin? Any of it true? I don't know. Abigail's hands were on her mother's face, her throat feeling for the pulse. I don't. She never told me she sent Mama. Was that true, Mama? Ruth's lips moved. No sound came. Then barely, made him? Believe it. That's all. That ever matters. What they believe. Don't talk. Save it. Nothing left to save it for. A ghost of the old iron. Abigail, the doll. Guard the doll. I will. I swear it. Stop talking. Caleb was at the wagon, and he made the decision in the space of one breath, the ugly arithmetic finished before he'd finished thinking it. The wagon was dead. The wheel would not carry them another mile. He had one horse. He had a dying woman, a fainting child, a boy who could walk, and a mother who could walk carrying the child. And town was a mile and a half off through the wash and out past the schoolhouse. Abigail, listen to me and don't argue because we've got no time to argue. He was already unbuckling the roan from the traces. Your mother goes on the horse, in front of me. I'll hold her and ride hard for Doc Bell's. You carry Lily, and you come fast behind me. You'll take my mother and my no. No, give Lily the horse. Lily's the one that hasn't stood in 2 days. Lily's little and she's got you. Your mother's grown and she's got minutes, Abigail. Minutes. You want to spend one of them fighting me about it? That stopped her. Caleb watched it stop her, watched the mother in her go one way and the daughter in her go the other, and the two of them tear at each other for a single unbearable second in the sand. She's my mama, Abigail said, and it came out small, all the fight gone out of it, a girl's voice inside a widow's body. I know it. That's why she goes first. Caleb's voice gentled without slowing. I'm not choosing your girl over your mother. I'm choosing the horse for whoever's got the least time, and that's your mother. And you know it's your mother, and that's why it's tearing you in half. But you don't get to fall in half right now. Lily needs a whole mother for 1 more mile. Give me your mother, then run. For 1 more second, Abigail stood locked. Then she nodded one hard jerk of her chin, the same chin Caleb thought that had squared at him over a rope harness that morning, and she bent to help him lift. Samuel. Caleb caught the boy's eye. He was standing in the sand with his fists knotted, watching them lift his grandmother, and Caleb gave him a job because a job was the only mercy there was time for. You're the fastest thing this family's got that isn't a horse. Run ahead of us. Get to Doc Bell's door, pound on it. Tell him Caleb Whitaker's bringing a woman with a leg gone bad and a child down with the heat and to have the table cleared. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Say it back. Table cleared. Leg gone bad. Child down with the heat. Caleb Whitaker's coming. The boy was already breathing to run. I won't stop till I'm at the door. Good man. Go. Go now. Samuel went. He scrambled up the bank of the wash and was over it and gone a small fast shape flat out through the scrub. The boy ran the way children run when the running matters more than the breathing. His bare feet found the cactus, and he didn't stop for the cactus. His chest was afire and his legs had gone to water somewhere back in the wagon, and he ran on the water anyway, because Caleb had said table cleared, and leg gone bad, and child down with the heat, and Samuel had promised, and Samuel had learned in 2 hard years that a promise was the only thing a poor man owned that no rich man could take. He said the words over as he ran to keep from thinking about his grandmother's face. Table cleared, leg gone bad. He'd carried water to her lips 100 times these 3 days, and he knew the sound her breathing made now, and he knew what that sound meant, and he ran from the knowing as much as toward the door. The schoolhouse, the first fence, a woman on a porch who stared, a dog that barked and gave it up, and then the doctor's gate and the doctor's door painted green, and Samuel hit it with both fists and did not stop hitting it, and when it opened on a wide man in shirt sleeves, the boy got the whole speech out in one collapsing breath before his legs finally quit and put him down on the step. Table cleared, leg gone bad, child down with the heat. Caleb Whitaker's coming. Don't let her die. Don't let my grandmother die. She's the only one who can read. Slow down, son. But the doctor was already moving, already reaching back inside for his bag, already reading off the boy's face. That slowing down was the one thing there was no time for. You did fine. You did just fine. Stay on that step and breathe. They're coming. On the horse. Fast. Then breathe, boy, so you're standing when they get here. Behind Samuel, out past the fences, Caleb turned to the horse. Getting Ruth onto the roan was the worst thing Caleb had done with his hands in 11 years. She weighed nothing. That was the horror of it. A grown woman, a schoolteacher, a mother, and she weighed no more than a sack of feed, and when he lifted her, she made a sound that wasn't a scream because she didn't have the wind for a scream, and her bad leg swung, and the black rag came half off, and Caleb saw the wound, and understood there was no leg left to save only a woman, and only maybe. He mounted behind her, and gathered her against his chest with one arm, and took the reins in the other. Abigail. Lily. Now. Abigail already had the child up out of the bed and against her shoulder, Lily's arms hanging, and she grabbed the rag doll off the boards and jammed it inside the child's dress against her chest without breaking stride. And then she was climbing the bank, slipping, clawing up it, one-handed with her daughter's whole slack weight on the other arm, and Caleb watched her do it, and did not offer to take the child, because there was no room on the horse, and both of them knew it. Go, Abigail said at the top of the bank, gasping. Don't wait for me. Get her to the doctor. Go. Caleb went. He put the roan up the near bank at a scramble and out onto the flat and let it run. Ruth's head lay against his shoulder, and he could feel her breathing against his forearm, quick and light, and getting quicker and lighter. And he bent low over her and talked to her the whole way, low and steady, the way he'd talked to a fevered woman once before, in a room he'd nailed shut. Stay with me now, Ruth. You hear? You didn't stare down Silas Vane just to quit on me a mile from the doctor. Stay with me. Think about your grandbabies. Think about that boy running his heart out ahead of us. He's running for you. You quit now, he runs for nothing. So you don't quit. You breathe. One more. There. One more. For a stretch, she didn't answer, and Caleb thought he'd lost her already. Then her hand found his forearm, where it crossed her chest, and gripped it with a strength that startled him, and she spoke against his shoulder in a voice gone almost clear, the way a fire goes bright right before it drops to coals. Whitaker. Listen. In case I don't listen. She swallowed. The doll's copy is real, every line true, but if they burn it, or lose it, or call me a liar in a courtroom, the numbers are here. She tapped her own temple with a shaking finger. I taught school 40 years. I don't forget a figure. I can name every entry from memory if I live to say it, so you get me to a Judge Whittaker. Not a jail, not a grave. A judge. Alive. That's the whole of it. That's the only thing I'm asking of you. You'll say it yourself, to the judge. I'll get you there. Don't promise a dying woman a thing you can't hold. I don't promise things I can't hold. Ask anybody. I'm a poor liar and a worse dancer. He bent lower over her, the town coming up. You're going to live long enough to bore a federal judge stiff with numbers, Ruth Mercer. And then you're going to sit on my porch and keep my ranch books honest, because Lord knows I can't do sums. And you're going to be a mean old woman about it for another 20 years. That's what's going to happen. Now breathe. Something that might have been a laugh moved through her, or might have been the last of the air. Bold. To plan my next 20 years. You've known me an afternoon. I've known your kind my whole life, Caleb said. Breathe. The schoolhouse went by on the left. The first fences of town. And somewhere back on the flat, small and dogged, he could hear Abigail coming, the double rhythm of a woman running with a child's weight against her, not slowing, not stopping, the same relentless step that had cut a rope into her own shoulders that morning. Caleb didn't look back. He trusted that step now the way he trusted few things left in the world. One more, Ruth. Doc's got a table cleared and clean water, and every day God gives. You just get there, that's all. Get there and let go of the rest. I'll carry the rest. You just get there. He could see the doctor's house now at the near end of the street. And God bless the boy, Samuel back up off the step and out at the gate, swaying, but on his feet, waving both arms over his head. And behind him a man in shirt sleeves with a black bag already in his fist. Doc Bell wide as a barn door and reading the whole situation off the shape of Caleb's ride, before the roan had covered half the street. Caleb brought the roan down the street at a dead run and hauled up in a slide of dust at the doctor's gate. And Doc Bell was there, arms up, and between them, they got Ruth down off the horse, and Caleb felt the change in her as she passed from his arms to the doctor's. Felt the quick, light bird breathing that had been going against his forearm the whole ride. Simply pause. She's not breathing, Caleb said. Doc Bell had her on the ground already, on her back, one huge hand flat on her chest. Ruth Mercer, don't you do this on my lawn, he pressed. Samuel, get inside on the shelf by the window. The brown bottle, bring it. Go. He pressed again. Whittaker, where's the daughter? Coming. Behind me. Carrying the little girl. She's down with the heat. Then we've got two. The doctor bent to Ruth's gray face. Come on, woman. Breathe. You've got a whole family running toward you. Breathe. And that was when Caleb heard from the other end of the street the sound of horses. He turned in the saddle. Coming up the street at a walk, unhurried, in no rush at all, because they knew exactly where their quarry had gone to ground, rode Sheriff Amos Pike with a folded paper in his hand, and beside him, restored to his banker's calm, one gloved hand resting easy on his saddle horn, rode Silas Vane. Caleb did not watch the horses come. He watched Ruth's chest. Doc Bell had his whole weight on the heels of his hands, now counting under his breath, and he pressed, and nothing came. And he pressed again, and still nothing. And Caleb heard the doctor stop counting and start swearing low and steady, which was worse. Come on, you contrary old woman. I have delivered your grandchildren's whole generation, and I will not lose you on my grass. Come on. On the fourth press, Ruth Mercer's body convulsed, and she pulled a breath, a real one, ragged and greedy and loud, and then another, and the gray started to go out of her face by inches. There it is, Doc said, not stopping. There she is. All right, Ruth. All right, you old warhorse. I've got you. He looked up, and his eyes went past Caleb to the two riders slowing at the gate, and something flat and hard came into the doctor's face. Whittaker, I have to get her inside and open that leg in the next 10 minutes, or the breathing won't matter. You understand whatever's about to happen out here, I can't be part of it. I'll be in there with a knife and a dying woman. So whatever you're going to do to keep that man off my door, you do it alone. I know it. Then get her lifted with me, and then you go be a wall. They carried her up the steps between them. Caleb backed through the green door with the woman's shoulders in his arms, and the last thing he saw before he set her on the doctor's table was Sheriff Amos Pike, swinging down off his horse at the gate, with the folded warrant in his fist, and his face already sick with what he'd been sent to do. Caleb laid Ruth down. He straightened, and then he walked back out onto the doctor's porch and pulled the green door shut behind him, and stood in front of it with his hands empty at his sides. "Sheriff," he said. "Caleb." Pike stopped at the bottom of the steps. He was a lean, gray-mustached man who'd been sheriff of Bitter Fork 11 years, and Caleb had always taken him for tired more than crooked. "I got no quarrel with you. You know that. I got a warrant here sworn out lawful this morning for the arrest of Abigail Mercer and the recovery of—" His mouth worked around it. "The recovery of 2 minor children held as debt collateral by the estate of Silas Vane." "You hear yourself say that, Amos?" "I hear it." "You got children of your own. You going to stand there and read me a paper that calls 2 babies collateral?" Pike's jaw tightened. "I got a job. The paper's lawful whether I like the shape of it or not." Behind him, Silas Vane dismounted, without any hurry at all, handed his reins to nobody, and let them drop. He came up to stand a little behind the sheriff's shoulder, and he did not look at Caleb. He looked at the closed green door as if he could see through it to the thing he'd come 9 miles to collect. "The children are inside," Vane said. It was not a question. "The children are wherever the law's got no business following them," Caleb said. "That's a doctor's house. There's a woman on his table right now with a leg gone to poison and the doctor cutting on her, and you are not going to march a warrant through that room. I'll wait for the doctor to finish." Vane clasped his gloved hands in front of him, patient as a headstone. "I've all the time in the world, Mr. Whitaker. That's the difference between us. You're fighting a day. I'm collecting on years." And that was when Abigail came. She came around the last fence at a dead stumble. Lily's slack weight against her shoulder, her bare feet bleeding, her breath tearing out of her in sobs. She didn't have the air to make sound. And she saw the horses at the gate and the sheriff on the walk, and she did not slow down. She came straight on, straight through the gate, straight past Vane, close enough to brush his clean coat. And she got to the steps, and Caleb came down one, and took Lily out of her arms, before her knees gave. "Ma!" Abigail gasped. "My mother, is she—" "Alive. Doc's got her. She's breathing." Caleb had the child against his chest, now the little girl's heart going too fast and too light under his forearm. "Go inside. Take Lily to the doctor. Stay in there with your mother and your girl, and you do not come back out this door no matter what you hear. You understand me? No matter what you hear out here, you stay in there. Samuel, behind you coming. I'll get the boy. Go." She went. The green door opened and closed, and Caleb was alone on the porch again with the child gone from his arms and his hands empty, and a sheriff and a cattle baron looking up at him from the walk. Samuel came last, limping, one hand pressed to a stitch in his side, and Vane's head turned to track the boy the way a hawk's head tracks a rabbit, and Caleb saw it and moved down 2 steps to put himself in the line between them before Vane's voice could reach the child. "Up the steps, son," Caleb said quietly. "Straight past me. Inside with your mother. Don't stop. Don't look at anybody. Go." Samuel went past him, and at the door. He stopped anyway. 10 years old. And he stopped and turned and looked back at Caleb, standing alone below him against 2 men. And Caleb said, "Go on. I've got the door." And the boy went, and the door shut. And now the whole family was behind Caleb Whitaker, and the whole trouble was in front of him. "Touching," Vane said. "Amos." Caleb didn't take his eyes off the sheriff. "You want to serve that warrant, you'll have to come through this door, and to come through this door, you'll have to come through me, and I don't think you came out here today ready to shoot a rancher on a doctor's porch in front of God and half your town. And there is half your town, Amos. Look behind you." Pike didn't look. He didn't have to. Caleb had watched them gather while he talked 3, then 6, then a dozen townspeople drifting up the street, the way people always drift toward the smell of trouble, keeping their distance, watching from wagon seats and doorways, and the corner of the mercantile. Bitter Fork had come to see what the sheriff would do. "That doesn't change the law," Pike said. But his voice had gone lower, aware now of the ears. "No. but it changes the price of the law. Caleb kept his voice even and let it carry. You break down a doctor's door tonight to drag off a sick woman's grandchildren, and every soul on this street watches you do it, and you will be the man who did that for the rest of your life in this town. Your wife will hear it. Your boy will hear it. Is that the price Silas Vane's paying you? Because I'll tell you what he's paying: nothing. He's paying you nothing. He's letting you spend your own good name so he doesn't have to spend a dime of his. Something crossed Pike's face. Caleb marked it and filed it a flinch, quick, gone, but real. He'd said wife, and he'd said boy, and one of those had landed. Vane heard the crack in the air the same instant Caleb did, and Vane moved to seal it. Sheriff, Vane said smoothly, I think Mr. Whitaker misunderstands the matter, and I'd hate for you to be swayed by a man who's known this family a single afternoon and mistaken his own loneliness for their innocence. He drew a second paper from inside his coat, unfolded it with 2 fingers, and held it up so the light caught the seal at the bottom. This is not merely a warrant. This is a temporary order of custody granted this morning by Judge Owen Harlan of the District Court, placing the Mercer children under the guardianship of my estate, pending settlement of the mother's debt. It is signed. It is sealed. It is the considered judgment of a sitting judge. He turned the paper a slow quarter so the watching town could see the red wax. So the question, Sheriff, is no longer whether you'll break a door. The question is whether you'll defy a court order to protect a confessed thief. That's a different question. That's the question that ends a career. Caleb felt the ground shift under the argument. It was the thing he'd feared. Vane hadn't come with muscle. He'd come with paper, and paper beat muscle in a town that wanted to believe it was lawful. Judge Harlan, Caleb said, a respected jurist, a judge you've had to supper more times than any honest man should count. Everybody from here to the concho knows whose beef Owen Harlan eats. Caleb looked at the crowd, now deliberately letting them hear it. You didn't get a court order this morning, Vane. You bought one. Same as you bought the debt, same as you bought the note dated after Thomas Mercer was in the ground. You've got a judge in your pocket, and a sheriff you're trying to frighten, and a stack of paper that says you own 2 children. And paper's a powerful thing. His voice dropped. But there's a judge coming that you don't own. Circuit Judge Nathaniel Cross. Rides in on his own schedule, eats his own supper, answers to Austin and not to you. And when he gets here, every one of these papers gets read out loud in daylight. Judge Cross, Vane said, and for the first time there was something under the calm, not fear, but calculation sharpening. Judge Cross is not due in Bitter Fork for the better part of a week if the flooding on the Colorado hasn't held him up longer. A week is a long time, Mr. Whitaker, for a woman with a poisoned leg. A long time for a sick child. A long time for a man to stand alone in a doorway. He refolded the order with care. Sheriff Pike, I'll trouble you to do your duty. The court has spoken. These children are wards of my estate as of this morning. Every hour they remain in that house, this man is committing a crime, and so if he does nothing, are you, to me. The deputy who'd ridden in behind them, a young one more boy than man, eager the way the young are eager to prove a badge, swung off his horse and started up the walk toward the steps with his hand on his gun and his eyes on the closed green door. And Caleb stepped back to the door and reached inside it without looking, and his hand closed on the doctor's shotgun where it stood in the corner by the coat pegs, and he brought it out and up in one motion and leveled it down the steps. The whole street went still. The deputy stopped with one boot on the bottom stair. The crowd drew its breath as one animal. Caleb held the shotgun on the young deputy for a long, long moment, long enough for every soul on that street to see he could fire, long enough to feel the weight of it settle wrong in his hands, the same weight he'd carried in the wash that morning with the rifle. And then he did the hardest thing he'd done all day, harder than lifting Ruth, harder than the ride. He lowered it. He broke it open, thumbed the shells out into his palm, and set the empty shotgun down against the doorframe where everyone could see it, stand there useless, and he dropped the shells in his coat pocket, and he straightened up with his hands empty again. No, Caleb said. I'm not going to do it that way. A man who keeps children with a gun is just a smaller Silas Vane, and I'd rather lose honest than win like him." He looked at the young deputy still frozen on the stair. "Son, you take one more step up toward that door, and you'll come through because I won't shoot you. I'll just stand in the way, and you'll have to drag a grown man out of a doctor's threshold by the collar while your whole town watches you do it for $1 a day. So ask yourself if that's the story you want told about the first month you wore that star. Then decide." Deputy Toomey looked back over his shoulder at the sheriff. Pike's hand went to the warrant, then to his belt, then to nothing. He stood on the walk with his whole body caught between the paper in one hand and the town at his back, and Caleb watched a man drown standing up. "Stand down, Toomey," Pike said low. "Get off the man's steps." The deputy came down. "Amos," Caleb said, gentle now only for him. "Look at me, not the paper, me." Pike looked. "You knew my Mary," Caleb said. "You stood at her grave. You stood at Ellen's, that little one, that box, no bigger than a bread box. You put your hand on my shoulder that day, and you said, 'Caleb, if there's ever a thing I can do.' You remember saying it?" Pike's throat moved. "I remember. This is the thing." Caleb's voice never rose. "I'm not asking you to break a law. I'm asking you to wait 1 week for an honest man to read the papers. That's all. If Vane's order's clean, Judge Cross will uphold it, and I'll hand those children over myself and go home. But if it's dirty, and you know in your gut it's dirty, Amos, I can see you know, then waiting 1 week is the only thing standing between you and a lifetime of knowing you handed 2 babies to the man who starved them. You want to carry that? You who's got a boy asleep at home tonight. Don't," Pike said. It came out rough. "Don't bring my boy into it. Vane already brought him into it. Vane's the one spending your name and your sleep so he doesn't have to spend his own. I'm the one saying you don't have to let him." And Silas Vane, who had built a life on knowing exactly when to reach for the lever, reached for the wrong one. "Sheriff Pike," he said, and his voice was very quiet and very pleasant, and he said it just loud enough for the front of the crowd to catch. "Before you let this man work on your feelings, you might recall the note I hold on your homestead. $400 and 2 years yet to run. I've never once pressed you on it. I've been a patient neighbor. It would be a shame for Martha for the boy if a season came where I found I couldn't afford to be patient any longer. I'm sure you take my meaning. I'm sure you'll do the sensible thing." The words landed in a dead silent street, and for one instant Caleb thought Vane had won it, thought the threat had done what the court order couldn't. Then he heard the crowd. It was not a gasp this time. It was a low, ugly, gathering murmur, the sound a room makes when a man says the true thing out loud by accident. Because every soul on that street had just watched Silas Vane do in plain daylight to the sheriff. The exact thing they'd spent an hour arguing about, whether he'd done to a widow in the dark hold a paper over a man and use it to bend him. He'd meant it as a private threat. It came out as a public confession. "You hear that?" A woman's voice somewhere back in the press of people, sharp and unafraid. "You all hear that? That's how he does it. That's just exactly how he does it." Pike went still. Then he turned his head slow and looked at Silas Vane, the way a man looks at something he's just now seeing plain for the first time, after years of not letting himself look. "You hold my note," Pike said. "I do, and you'll call it if I don't hand him 2 children. Pike's voice was flat. "You'll turn Martha and my boy out of our house. Over this." "I said no such thing. I said I'm a patient man whose patience has limits." Vane spread his gloved hands. Reasonable. "You're twisting a neighbor's honest word." "No," Pike said. "I don't believe I am. I believe I heard you clear." He looked down at the warrant in his hand, and then at the folded court order Vane had shown, and then out at the faces of the town he'd been sheriff of for 11 scared years. "I've been afraid of you a long time, Silas. Longer than I've let myself know. And I just now heard what my fear sounds like from the outside in your mouth, and I find I can't stomach the sound of it." For a long moment, nobody on that street said anything. The crowd had gone dead quiet again, but it was a different quiet now, a leaning, waiting, gathering quiet. Sheriff Amos Pike stood on the walk with 2 papers and 1 conscience, and this time his feet did not move toward the steps. Then the green door opened behind Caleb. He didn't turn. He couldn't turn, but he felt her come out and heard the door click shut again, and Abigail Mercer stepped up beside him on the doctor's porch with her bleeding feet and her ruined dress and her chin up, and she looked down at Silas Vane, and she spoke in a voice that carried to the last soul at the back of the crowd. "Give it to him." Caleb's head came around. "Abigail." "You heard him, Caleb. A week. My mother doesn't have a week. My Lily's on that table burning up beside her." Her eyes never left Vane. "So I'll make my own trade. Silas Vane. You want the paper my mother copied the ledger, I'll give it to you. Right now in front of everybody. You take it, and you burn it, and there's nothing left to send to any judge in Austin or anywhere else. But you leave my children. You call off your court order and your warrant, and you leave my children with me. That's the trade. The paper for my babies. You've wanted that paper for 3 days. Here's your chance. Take it." Vane's eyes changed. Caleb saw the hunger come up in them quick, before the calm slid back over the hunger of a man offered the one thing that could hang him, offered freely by a woman worn down past pride. "That," Vane said softly, "is a sensible woman. Abigail, don't." Caleb turned to her, put his body between her and Vane, dropped his voice to her alone. "Listen to me. Look at me. You give him that paper, you've got nothing. You hear, right now that paper is the only thing on this earth that scares him. It's the only reason he's standing on the walk instead of kicking down this door. The second you hand it over, you're not a woman with leverage anymore. You're just a poor widow who confessed to theft in front of the whole town, and he's a rich man holding a court order, and there is nothing left to stop him taking your children the minute the ashes are cold. He gave his word. He didn't give his word. He said that's a sensible woman. That's not a promise, Abigail. That's a man agreeing to a bargain he means to break the instant it's cheaper to break it." Caleb took her by the shoulders gently, the way you'd steady someone at a graveside. "A cruel man doesn't offer you mercy. He offers you a smaller cage, and he tells you it's mercy because he knows how tired you are, and he's counting on the tired. Don't you climb into the smaller cage. Not after everything you dragged across that desert to stay out of it. She stole, though." A man's voice hard from the edge of the crowd, a heavy-set man in a storekeeper's apron, arms folded. "We all heard her say it in the wash. No, we heard it right here, she owned to it. Corn and meat off Whitaker's own place. A thief's a thief, Caleb. I don't care how sorry the story. You're standing up there defending a woman who robbed you." Caleb turned to face him, and when he spoke to the whole street, not the one man. "That's right," Caleb said. "She robbed me." He let it sit. "She took corn and meat and a canteen off my place 2 nights back, because her 6-year-old hadn't stood up in 2 days, and her mother's leg had gone black, and she'd sooner have been shot than knock on a stranger's door and beg. That's the thief you're all looking at, a mother who stole a sack of corn to keep a child breathing." His voice dropped and hardened. "Now I'll tell you what Silas Vane stole. He stole the Turnbull widow's East 40 with a paper she couldn't read. He stole 3 years of a dead man's wages off Abigail Mercer with a note dated after that man was in the ground. He's stolen from half the folks standing on this street and called it business, and not one of you ever gathered to watch a sheriff drag him off. So don't you talk to me about thieves. There's a thief on this street. He's just wearing the clean coat, and he never once got his hands dirty because he pays men $1 a day to do it for him." The storekeeper's arms came unfolded. He didn't have an answer. He looked for the first time less certain of the ground he stood on and around him. Caleb watched the same uncertainty move through the crowd, like wind through wheat. Abigail's whole body was shaking now, the shaking of someone holding up a weight past the point the arms can hold, and Caleb saw the exact moment it almost broke her, saw her look back at the green door with her mother and her babies behind it, saw her weigh a certain week against an uncertain lifetime. Saw how badly the tired wanted to say yes. "I'll do it," Abigail whispered. Only Caleb heard it. "Caleb, I'll do it. I can't gamble my babies on a maybe I'll give it to him." And the green door opened a crack, and Samuel's face appeared in the gap, white and set, and the boy looked out at his mother on the porch, and his voice came small and steady into the middle of everything. "Ma, Grandma's awake. She's asking for you." He swallowed. And she said to tell you, she said, don't you dare. She said she didn't copy that book for 2 years just so you'd hand it back at the first hard hour. She said she'll walk into that courtroom on one leg if she has to. His chin trembled and held. Don't do it, Ma. Please. Grandma says don't and I say don't. We didn't come all this way to go back in a cage. For a second, Abigail couldn't speak. Her son had used Caleb's word cage, a word he'd caught out of the air off a man he'd known one day, and given it back to her with his grandmother's iron behind it. And Caleb watched the two of them hold each other up across the gap in a green door, the boy inside and the mother out. And he understood he was watching a family decide to stay a family. Go back to your grandma, Abigail said, and her voice had changed, steadied, hardened, come home to itself. Tell her I heard her. Tell her I'm not trading anything. She turned back to face the gate, and her chin came up, and she was not shaking anymore. You hear that Silas Vane, a 10-year-old, just found more spine than you counted on. There's no trade. Keep your smaller cage. Mrs. Mercer? Vane's voice came up the steps, patient, reasonable, terrible in its reasonableness. Your mother is dying while this man makes speeches. Your daughter with her. Every minute you listen to him is a minute you steal from them. I am offering you certainty. He is offering you a doorway and a prayer. Choose. And it was Doc Bell who answered. The green door banged open, and the doctor filled it blood to the elbows, his knife still in one fist, and his voice came out of him like a felled tree. Nobody chooses one blessed thing till I've had my say, and my say is this. He pointed the knife straight down the steps at Silas Vane. That woman on my table is alive. You hear me, Vane, alive. I got the poison drained and the legs off at the knee, and by every rule of medicine, she should be dead, and she is not, because she is the stubbornest human being I have laid hands on in 40 years of doctoring, and she is not dying today on your schedule to make your bargain easier. He wiped the knife on his apron without looking at it. She's weak as water, and she can't stand and she can't testify tomorrow and maybe not the day after. But she's alive, and a live witness, Silas Vane, is worth a great deal more than a dead one. So you can put away that talk about her dying while the man makes speeches. She's not dying. She's just resting up to hang you. A sound went through the crowd. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a cheer, but a shift. A leaning in the town, moving an inch toward the doctor's porch and away from the man at the gate. Caleb felt it move, and he pressed. You hear that Amos, the witness, lives, which means in a week she stands in front of Judge Cross and names every name in that ledger from memory. She taught school 40 years. She doesn't forget a figure, and it won't be Whitaker's word against Vane's anymore. It'll be a school teacher's testimony, and a copied ledger, and a real judge. That's what Vane's afraid of. Not the paper, the weak. He needs those children out of the county, and that woman in the ground before Cross gets here, because a settled fact is hard to unsettle. And Vane's whole life is built on getting to the facts first. Caleb turned and looked out at the crowd, at all of them, and he raised his voice for the first time. How many of you signed a paper Vane read to you? How many made your mark on a note you couldn't read? How many of you are one bad season from being the family in that wagon? Nobody answered, but nobody looked away either. And then from the middle of the crowd a woman spoke. Elias Turnbull's widow. It was the same sharp voice that had called out before, and this time Caleb found the face to go with it, a thin woman in a gray bonnet, past 50, work-hardened, standing between a wagon and the mercantile wall, with her hands knotted in her apron. That's a name your old woman shouted in the wash this morning, ain't it? The woman said. Her voice climbed as she found her nerve. Curtis Hale told it around town not an hour ago before he rode out, said the Mercer woman's mother named names, and one of 'em was Elias Turnbull's widow, cheated of 40 acres. She stepped forward out of the crowd into the open. I'm Elias Turnbull's widow, and I never cheated on a debt in my life, and I never signed away no 40 acres, and when Elias passed, Silas Vane's man came to my door with a paper I couldn't read, and told me I owed, and I lost my East 40 inside a year. Her voice broke and hardened both at once. I thought it was just me. I thought I'd done something foolish. If that old woman's got my name in a book, Then it weren't just me, and it weren't foolishness. It was thieving. It was thieving with a pen. The crowd made its sound again louder now, and this time it had an edge to it, and the edge was pointed at the gate. Silas Vane's face did not change. That was the frightening thing, and Caleb watched it with a kind of cold admiration. The man's whole world was cracking on a public street, and his banker's calm held like a nailed board. But his eyes moved. His eyes went from the widow Turnbull to the crowd to the sheriff to the green door doing arithmetic, and Caleb watched him arrive at the same sum Caleb had arrived at a minute before that. Tonight on this street the numbers had gone against him. "Sheriff Pike." Vane's voice was still smooth, but it had gone brisk, the voice of a man cutting a losing hand. "I'll not have the district court's authority mocked by hysterics and a doctor's temper. But I am a reasonable man, and I have no wish to see you make an error under the influence of an emotional crowd. Serve the warrant tomorrow in daylight with clearer heads. The children aren't going anywhere. Neither is the debt." "No," Pike said. It came out so quiet that half the crowd didn't hear it, and Vane half turned toward his horse already stopped. "What did you say?" "I said no." Sheriff Amos Pike straightened his back for the first time since he'd stepped off his horse, and he turned the folded warrant over once in his hands and looked at it like it was something that had been handed to him by a stranger. "I'm not serving this tomorrow, and I'm not serving it tonight. Not till Judge Cross reads it. You want to file a complaint on me with Judge Harlan? You go right ahead. Silas, you and Harlan can eat supper on it. But I'm the law in Bitter Fork, not the district court, and not you. And the law in Bitter Fork is going to wait 1 week for an honest judge before it hands 2 children to any man." He drew a breath. "And if that costs me the badge, then it costs me the badge. I've worn it scared for a long time. I find I'd rather set it down clean than keep it dirty." For 1 second, one Silas Vane's calm slipped all the way off, and what showed underneath was not rage. It was something worse. It was the blank, patient, bottomless look of a man recalculating a loss he fully intends to recover with interest from everyone in earshot. "You've all made a very expensive decision today," Vane said. He said it to the whole street. He said it the way another man might say good afternoon. "Every one of you. The widow with her 40 acres. The doctor with his temper. The sheriff with his sudden conscience." His eyes came last to Caleb and stayed. "And you, most of all, Mr. Whitaker. You had nothing to lose this morning. I made a note of it. So I've spent the ride thinking about what a man with nothing can still be made to lose, and I want you to know I found several answers." He gathered his reins. "There's a week between now and Judge Cross. I've bought and sold whole lives in less time than that. Enjoy your victory tonight. It's the only one you'll get." He mounted the gray unhurried and turned it and rode back down the street at a walk through the crowd that parted for him, not out of respect, but out of the way you'd step back from a snake, and the town watched him go all the way to the end of the street and out of sight. Then it was over. The breath went out of the whole street at once. Caleb sat down. He hadn't meant to. His legs simply put him down on the top step of the doctor's porch, and he sat there with his forearms on his knees and his hands hanging, and he found they were shaking again, and he let them. Abigail sat down beside him. For a while, neither of them said anything. Behind them, through the open door, they could hear Doc Bell moving around his patient, and a low murmur that was Samuel talking to his sister, and under it all the thin, quick breathing of 2 people the doctor had pulled back from the edge that afternoon. "You could have let me trade," Abigail said finally. "I'd have done it. I was going to do it. I know. He'd have taken the paper and taken my children both, and I'd have handed him the knife to do it with." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "I've been so tired, Caleb. You don't know. I've been tired down in the bone for 2 years, and I'd have signed anything, traded anything for 1 hour where somebody else carried it." "I do know," Caleb said. "That's the whole reason I stood in the door. A tired person can't see the trap. Somebody's got to see it for them till they're rested enough to see it themselves." He looked out at the emptying street. "You'd have done the same for me. You already told me the truth about my locked-up room this morning, and you'd known me an hour. That's the same thing. You saw my trap when I couldn't." Abigail was quiet a moment. We're a fine pair. Neither one of us can see our own cage, but we can both see the other one's. Reckon that's most of what people are for, Caleb said. They weren't alone as long as they thought. The street had emptied of the crowd, but not everyone had gone home. The widow Turnbull came up the doctor's walk with a covered basket on her arm and set it on the bottom step without being asked, and she stood there, twisting her apron the way she had all afternoon. "There's bread and a little ham and a jar of milk for the young ones," she said to Abigail, not quite meeting her eyes. "It ain't much. I lost the 40. I don't have much." She stopped, then made herself say the rest. "I want to say this morning I'd have called you a thief right along with the rest of 'em. I want you to know I'm ashamed of that. Your mother put my name in a book so somebody someday would know it weren't my fault. Nobody's ever done a thing like that for me. So." She set her jaw. "Whatever you need these 3 days. I'll be at the end of the street. You send that boy, and I'll come." Abigail couldn't answer right off. When she did, her voice was rough. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me. I'm 2 years late." The widow Turnbull turned to go, then turned back. "That old woman in there, when she's able. I'd like to shake her hand." "She'd like that," Abigail said. "She was a schoolteacher. She likes being right in front of witnesses." That got the ghost of a smile out of the widow, and she went. And she wasn't the last. A man left a sack of feed for the roan. Another left an old crutch on the porch rail wordless for whenever the woman inside might want it, and Caleb understood the meaning of the crutch, that the whole street had heard Doc say the leg was off, and that this was a hardlands way of saying we know and we're sorry, and we'll wait for her too. Sheriff Pike came up last on foot, his hat in his hands. "I'm leaving Toomey posted at the corner tonight," Pike said, "and I'll take the second watch myself. Vane won't try the house with a badge on the step. It's not his way. He likes it quiet and legal. But he'll try something, and I'd rather it try me than you." He worked the brim of his hat. "Caleb, what you said out there. About Mary. About that day at the grave." He couldn't finish it. "I know Amos. I meant it that day. I let being scared talk me out of a lot of things I meant." Pike put his hat back on. "Not tonight, though. Whatever else. Not tonight." He went down to the corner to stand his watch, and for a while the porch was quiet again. Then the green door opened, and Samuel came out. The boy stood a moment taking in the empty street where the horses and the guns had been, and then he crossed the porch and sat himself down on the step below Caleb and Abigail, closed his shoulder against his mother's knee, and he didn't say anything for a bit. "Grandma's sleeping now," he said finally. "Real sleeping. Not the other kind. Lily, too. She drank a whole cup and asked for more." "That's good, baby," Abigail said, and put her hand in his hair. Samuel looked up at Caleb. "You put the shotgun down. Out there. I saw it through the crack in the door. You had it up, and then you put it down." He said it like it was a puzzle he'd been working. "Why'd you put it down when it was the thing that'd have made him go?" Caleb took a while with it, because the boy deserved a real answer, and not a quick one. "Because a gun only works till somebody calls it," he said. "Point it long enough, and either you fire it or you look like a liar, and either way, you've lost the only thing that was ever really keeping your family safe, which is that the town's on your side. The town doesn't stand with a man who'd shoot a deputy on a doctor's porch. But it'll stand with a man who wouldn't." He looked down at the boy. "Your grandma won today with a book. Your mama won today by refusing a bad trade. The doctor won with a knife and a temper. Not one of us won it with a gun, and that's exactly why it held. You remember that, Samuel? The loudest thing in the room is almost never the strongest." Samuel thought about that serious as a judge, and nodded once. Then he leaned his head against his mother's knee and let his eyes close, and within a minute, the boy who'd carried water for 3 days and run a mile on bleeding feet and faced down a cattle baron through a crack in a door was asleep. Sitting up safe, for the first time in 2 years, and none of them moved for fear of waking him. Doc Bell came out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a clean rag now, and lowered himself onto the top step on Caleb's other side, with the groan of a big man past 60 careful not to jostle the sleeping boy. For a while, The four of them just sat, three awake and one asleep in the settling quiet. "She's going to live?" Caleb asked. "She's going to try. That's the most I'll promise about anybody." Doc worked a knot out of his shoulder. "The leg's gone. She'll wake mad about it. She's the kind that'd rather have kept the leg and lost the argument. But the poison's out, and the fever's breaking, and the little girl's taking water and keeping it down. Give me 3 days of quiet, and I'll give you back a family." He glanced sideways at Caleb. "Which is where I've got to be the one to tell you the hard part since nobody else has done the sum out loud yet. Say it." Vane said a week for Judge Cross. He was being generous to himself, hoping we'd despair of it. Doc folded the rag. "But I sent my boy to the telegraph the minute I got Ruth breathing, and the wire came back while I was taking that leg. The flooding on the Colorados dropped. Judge Nathaniel Cross is closer than Vane wants anybody to know. He'll make Bitter Fork in 3 days, not 7. 3. Caleb turned to look at him. "That's good news. Half of it's good news." Doc Bell's face was grim, and he made himself hold Caleb's eyes while he said the rest. "Because 3 days is also exactly long enough for a man like Silas Vane, and not 1 hour more than he needs. He heard me say the witness lives. He heard the whole town say it. He knows now that in 3 days, that woman stands in front of an honest judge and hangs him. Which means Vane's got 3 days to make sure she never gets there, 3 days to reach her or the paper or that boy or you, and he is not going to spend them arranging his defense." The doctor stood slow and looked down at the two of them on his steps. "He's going to spend them making certain there's no trial at all." Caleb did not sleep that first night, and he did not pretend to. He sat on the top step of Doc Bell's porch, with the reloaded shotgun across his knees and his back to the green door. And behind that door were 4 people breathing an old woman with one leg. A little girl coming back from the edge of the heat. A boy asleep for the first time in 2 years, and their mother who came out at midnight with a blanket and put it around Caleb's shoulders and sat down beside him without a word. "You should sleep," Caleb said. "So should you. One of us has to watch the corner. Then we'll both watch it." Abigail pulled her knees up under the blanket. Down at the end of the street, Deputy Toomey stood in the dark by the mercantile, a lit cigarette. The only thing that gave him away, and past him somewhere in the black, was the town, and past the town was Silas Vane doing his arithmetic. "You think he'll come tonight?" "Not himself. He never does anything himself." Caleb kept his eyes on the corner. "But a man who says out loud that he'll make sure there's no trial has already decided to try something, so we watch." They watched, and a little after 2, when the moon was down and Toomey's cigarette had long gone dark, Caleb heard it not from the street, but from behind the house, the small wrong sound of a man trying to be quiet, who wasn't good at it. A boot on gravel, a held breath, the scrape of somebody testing a back window. Caleb was up and moving before he'd decided to move. He went around the side of the house low and fast, the shotgun in his hands, and he came around the back corner, and there were 2 of them at the rear window, one with a pry bar working the sash, and one holding a lantern shuttered down to a slit, and Caleb didn't say a word. He cocked both barrels. In the dead quiet night, that sound was the loudest thing in the county. Both men froze. "Set the bar down," Caleb said. "Slow. Then you're going to tell me what Silas Vane's paying you to break into a house with a sick child in it, and then you're going to run, and I'm going to let you, because I'd rather you carried a message back than carried a load of buckshot." The one with the pry bar set it down. He was young, jumpy, and over his head. "We ain't Vane didn't send us to hurt nobody. We was just to get the papers, the old woman's papers. There's $50 for the papers and no questions." $50. Caleb almost laughed. He put a $50 bounty on a rag of paper. That's how scared he is. You hear that, Abigail? She'd come around the corner behind him, and beyond her, drawn by the sound, Deputy Toomey was pounding up from the street with his gun out. "Silas Vane will pay $50 in the dark for a thing he swears in the daylight is a forgery worth nothing. Toomey, you heard that too." "Heard it plain," Toomey said, breathing hard, his gun on the 2 men now. "Heard him say Vane sent him for the Mercer papers." "Then that's a witness and a confession both, and it's yours to hold." Caleb lowered the shotgun. "Take him in, deputy. Wake the sheriff. And in the morning you tell Silas Vane that the first thing his own hired man did was prove the papers real by trying to steal it. Toomey took them. And Caleb stood in the dark behind the house with the shotgun hanging in one hand, and Abigail came and stood close, and neither of them said anything for a minute. "You moved so fast," she said finally. "I didn't even see you go." "I've had 11 years of practice at being the only one awake in a house at night," Caleb said. "Turns out it's good for something after all." It was the closest he'd come to saying the thing out loud, and Abigail heard it, and she put her hand on his arm in the dark, just for a moment, and then they went back around to the porch to finish the watch. The gray light came up slow, and with it came Curtis Hale. He rode in alone the way he'd ridden out of the wash. No wages, now a saddlebag and a bedroll, and the look of a man who'd slept in the open, and he stopped his horse at the gate and did not come in. "I heard about last night," Hale said. "2 of Vane's men taken breaking in. Word's already all over town before breakfast." "You came to gloat or to help?" Caleb asked. "To tell you what's coming, since I'm the only one left who knows the inside of it." Hale swung down, slow hands open. "I rode for Vane 18 months. I know how the man loses because I've watched him lose before, and he only ever loses one way. He loses in the daylight, after he's already tried everything in the dark. So he'll have tried the papers. That was last night. When that fails, he'll go to the courtroom, and in the courtroom, he does the same trick every time." Hale looked up at the porch at Abigail. "He'll say the old woman's copy is a fake. He'll say she's a bitter cheat who wrote a pack of lies in her own hand to escape an honest debt, and there's no way on God's earth to prove her scribbles match his real books, because his real books, Abby, are the one thing he'll never let into a courtroom. He keeps the true ledger in a strong box in his study, and it never leaves the house. So it comes down to her word against his paper, and a stranger judge won't hang a rich man on a dead schoolteacher's beg. Pardon, a sick schoolteacher's word alone." "Then how do we win?" Abigail said. "You get the real ledger." Hale said it flat. "That's the whole game. His copy against yours proves nothing. His real book against yours proves everything, because they'll match entry for entry, and the only way 2 books match that close is if one was copied off the other. You put his true ledger next to Ruth's copy in front of an honest judge, and it's over. That's the only way it's over." He hesitated. "And I'll tell you the other thing, because you've a right to know it, and because I helped make it true. That note, the one dated after Thomas was in the ground. I was there when Dutch forged Thomas's mark on it. I didn't hold the pen. But I stood in the room, and I said nothing, and that's the same as holding the pen." His jaw worked. "I'll say so. In the courtroom. In front of the judge and the whole town and God, if it'll help the boy. I'll stand up and say what I watched Dutch Reller do and let it cost me whatever it costs." For a long moment nobody spoke. "Why?" Caleb said. "Why now? You had 18 months to say it. Because for 18 months I told myself a man's got to eat and a man's got to think of himself, and there's no shame in drawing wages." Hale looked at his own hands. "And then a 10-year-old boy I used to bounce on my knee looked at me down the barrel of a wash yesterday morning, and he wasn't scared of me. That was the worst of it. He wasn't scared. He just looked at me like he was sad for what I'd turned into. I can't unsee a child being sad for me, Whitaker. I've tried. I rode all night trying." He put his hat back on. "Tell me where to be and when, and I'll be there." Caleb looked at Abigail. It was her call, and he waited on it. "Be at the hotel," Abigail said, "when the judge comes. And Curtis, thank you. I can't say it's forgiven, but I can say thank you." "That's more than I earned," Hale said, and mounted and rode off to wait. That was the first day. The second day, Silas Vane sent a man instead of coming himself, a lawyer's clerk in a town suit, who rode up to the doctor's gate at mid-morning and would not dismount and asked to speak with Mr. Whitaker alone. "Say it in front of her," Caleb said, nodding at Abigail on the porch. "There's nothing about me she doesn't get to hear." The clerk cleared his throat. "Mr. Vane wishes to make you an offer in the spirit of avoiding an ugly public matter that helps no one. He is prepared to purchase your ranch, all 2,000 acres stock and water rights, included at 3 times its assessed value, in gold, this week. He asks only that you take your money and the Mercer family, if you like, and start fresh somewhere well east of here, and let this whole misunderstanding settle quietly on its own. The clerk produced a folded paper. The figure's written here. I'm told it would make you the richest man in the county overnight. Mr. Vane's words were a man with nothing to lose should be given something to lose, and then he'll be reasonable. Caleb didn't take the paper. He looked at it in the clerk's hand the way you'd look at something that had crawled up out of a hole. You tell Silas Vane he's got me figured exactly backward, Caleb said. He thinks a man with nothing to lose is dangerous because he might do anything. But that's not the danger. The danger is a man with nothing to lose can't be bought because there's no price high enough to matter to a man who already lost the only things that were ever worth having. He's offering me gold. I buried the only 2 people gold could have made me happy for. What in God's name would I do with 3 times the money and none of the reasons? He stepped back. Take your paper. Tell him the ranch isn't for sale, the family isn't for moving, and the trial's on. And tell him one more thing from me. A man who tries to hand you something to lose the day before he stands trial has already told you he knows he's losing. Now get off the doctor's gate. The clerk went. Abigail watched him ride off, and then she looked at Caleb for a long moment. 3 times the value, she said quietly. You could have walked away rich. Nobody would have blamed you. It's not your fight. It stopped being about blame in the wash, Caleb said, and would not say more, and she let him keep it. Not everyone in Bitter Fork had turned, though, and Abigail felt the ones who hadn't. When she walked to the mercantile that afternoon for thread to mend Lily's dress, 2 women she'd never met went quiet as she passed, and then not quiet enough, and she caught the word thief riding on a whisper meant for her to hear, and behind it, worse a stole from that poor lonesome rancher, and now she's got her hooks in him. She kept her chin up, and paid for her thread, and walked home, and she did not tell Caleb, because there was nothing he could do about a whisper, and it would only make him stand another night's watch against a thing that couldn't be shot. But it sat in her. It sat right down beside the older, tireder fear that whatever this was between her and the man on the porch, the town would always know the shape of how it started and call it by the ugliest name it had. Ruth woke on the 2nd evening. Abigail was at her mother's bedside when the old woman's eyes came open clear for the first time. Not fever-bright, now just tired and sharp, and entirely herself. And Ruth looked down the length of her own body under the quilt, and she saw the flat place where her leg ought to have been, and she was quiet a long moment. "Well," Ruth said at last, "I always did say I'd like to travel lighter in my old age." Abigail made a sound that was half a laugh and half everything else, and put her face down against her mother's shoulder, and Ruth stroked her hair with a hand gone thin as paper. "None of that," Ruth said. "None of that. I'm not dead, and I'm not done. A leg's a leg. My head's the part Silas Vane needs to worry about, and my head is right where I left it." She lifted Abigail's chin. "The paper, the doll. Is it safe?" "It's safe, Mama." "And the trial. Judge Cross comes tomorrow. Curtis Hale says Vane will claim your copy's a forgery. Says the only way to beat him is to put your copy next to his real ledger, and he keeps that locked in his house, and it never comes out." Ruth's eyes changed the school teacher's eyes, the ones that had caught 40 years of children in 40 years of small lies. "Does it now? It never comes out." She lay back against the pillow. "Then somebody had better see that it does. Because Curtis Hale is right about one thing, my copy alone is just an old woman's handwriting. But I'll tell you what my copy is not, Abigail. It is not wrong. There is not one figure in it I invented. And a man who has spent his life certain that nobody could ever match his books has grown careless about hiding them because he's never once been afraid of a witness before." She closed her eyes, gathering strength. "Get me to that courtroom. On one leg and a chair on a board if you have to carry me. Get me in front of Nathaniel Cross. And find some way, you or Whitaker or the sheriff or the good Lord, to get that strong box open. That's all I need. The rest I've had memorized for 2 years. She slept again after that. But she'd said it, and it steadied the whole house. The second night, Caleb watched again, and this time Samuel came out and sat with him. "Ma said I should sleep," the boy said, "but I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the wheels." "That'll fade," Caleb said. "Slower than you'd like, but it fades." Samuel was quiet a while. "Can I tell you something and you won't tell Ma? Because it'd make her cry, and she's cried enough." "You can tell me." "I forgot what safe feels like." The boy said it, staring straight out at the dark street. "That's the thing nobody knows. 2 years I've been the one that had to be awake. When Ma slept, I watched. When Grandma got sick, I carried the water. I forgot there was ever a time I got to just be a kid and let a grown-up do the worrying. And then last night you told me to sleep, and I did. And this morning I woke up, and for about 1 second before I remembered everything I felt." He stopped hunting the word. "I felt light, like something got lifted off. And then I felt bad for feeling light because Grandma's leg's gone and we've got no house and it ain't over. So I don't know if I'm allowed to feel it." Caleb took his time. The boy had handed him something real, and a real thing deserved a real answer. "You're allowed," Caleb said. "That light feeling that's not you forgetting the hard things. That's your body telling you it found somebody it can trust to share the load. That's all safe ever is, Samuel. It's not the hard things going away. It's not being the only one carrying them anymore." He looked at the boy. "You carried this family 2 years by yourself. You did a grown man's job in a boy's body, and you did it well. And I'm going to tell you the truth, you shouldn't have had to. It wasn't right that you had to. But it's done now. There's more than one grown-up awake in this house tonight, so you go on and feel light. You've got it coming." Samuel didn't say anything. But after a while his head came to rest against Caleb's arm, and this time Caleb didn't feel the nailed-shut door crack. He felt it open a little quiet on oiled hinges he'd forgotten he had. Abigail saw it from the doorway. She'd come to bring coffee, and she stopped in the door with 2 cups going cold in her hands, and watched her son asleep against the shoulder of a man they'd known 3 days. And she understood something then that she'd been circling since the wash. She'd thought that first morning that Caleb Whitaker helped them out of pity, the reflex of a decent man who couldn't ride past. She'd been braced for it, even the way you brace for pity, because pity always came with a bill at the end. But a man doesn't stand 3 nights awake on a porch out of pity. A man doesn't answer a scared boy's confession at 2 in the morning out of pity. Pity helps, and then it wants to leave. What she was looking at wasn't pity. It was a man who'd buried his own boy and girl in the ground, and had been carrying that grave around inside him for 11 years, and who had found in her ruined family not somebody to feel sorry for, but somebody to pour all that dammed-up love into before it killed him from the inside. He wasn't saving them. They were without meaning to saving him right back. She set the coffee down inside the door and did not interrupt them, and she went and lay down next to her sleeping daughter. And for the first time in 2 years, Abigail Mercer slept the whole night through because somebody else was awake. Judge Nathaniel Cross came into Bitter Fork the next morning, dusty, unhurried, a spare old man with a face like a closed account. And the whole town knew, inside the hour, that the circuit judge had ridden in ahead of Silas Vane's schedule, and that the hearing would be held that very afternoon in the dining room of the Drovers Hotel, the only room in town with space for the crowd that meant to come. Caleb carried the copied pages in himself and laid them on the table in front of the judge before anyone else could speak. "Your Honor, my name's Caleb Whitaker. I own a ranch out on the Concho. 3 days ago I caught a woman stealing corn off my place, and by the time I understood why she was stealing it, I'd thrown in with her whole family, and I don't intend to throw out now." He set the pages down. These were copied by Ruth Mercer out of Silas Vane's own ledger. Every name in them is a person Vane cheated. I'm asking you to read them, and I'm asking you to hear the woman who wrote them, and I'm asking you to hold off Vane's warrant and his custody order until you have. Judge Cross looked at the pages. He looked at Caleb. "And where is the woman who wrote them?" "Being carried in now, Your Honor. She lost a leg to a poisoned wound 3 days ago. She's coming anyway." The dining room was full to the walls. Abigail sat in the front with Lily on her lap, and Samuel pressed to her side. The widow Turnbull was there, and half the folks whose names were in Ruth's pages, and Sheriff Pike stood by the door with his badge on, and Toomey beside him, and Curtis Hale sat at the back with his hat in his hands. And at the far table, in a clean coat, calm as a Sunday, sat Silas Vane with a lawyer at his elbow, a smooth, soft-handed man named Grady, who did his talking for him. They brought Ruth Mercer in on a kitchen chair, 4 men carrying it, her stump wrapped and propped, and her back straight as a schoolhouse ruler, and when they set her down before the judge, the whole room went quiet. Grady stood at once. "Your Honor, before this goes further, I must object to any testimony from this woman. She is gravely ill. She lost a limb 3 days ago. She is feverish medicated, and by any reasonable standard not competent to give reliable testimony. Whatever she says, it cannot be trusted, and it would be cruel to us all to pretend otherwise. I move that her so-called copy be excluded, and that we proceed on the documents properly filed by Mr. Vane's estate, the debt note, and the custody order signed by Judge Harlan." "He's not wrong that I lost a leg," Ruth said before the judge could rule. Her voice filled the room. "I did. Left it on Henry Bell's table Tuesday. But I notice, Mr. Grady, that you object to my memory and not to my mind, and there's a difference, and a lawyer ought to know it." A ripple went through the crowd. "So let's test the memory you're so worried about. Ask me anything in those pages. Ask me a figure. I taught this county's children their sums for 40 years, and there's grown men in this room who still can't cipher a feed bill because they slept through my class, but I never once forgot a number in my life, and I did not start 3 days ago." Judge Cross looked at her a long moment, then dry as chalk. "Mr. Grady's objection is noted. I'll determine the reliability of the witness by hearing her, which is the customary method. Mrs. Mercer, you may proceed." And Ruth Mercer began to name them. She named Elias Turnbull's widow 40 acres, the false debt of $200, the date the interest Vane had added month on month until the land was cheaper to surrender than to keep. The widow Turnbull stood up in the crowd shaking and said, "That's true, every word, that's exactly true." And the judge told her gently to sit and marked something on his paper. She named the Dokes children taken as debt collateral the spring before sent to the Rutherford Mill in Fort Worth, and she named the exact sum against which 2 children had been priced, and a low sound of horror moved through the dining room because half of them had known the Dokes family, and had been told the children were sent to relations. She named a dozen more. Wages docked and never restored. Notes signed by folks who couldn't read. Widows and old men, and one blind veteran of the war who'd put his mark on a paper he was told was a receipt and lost his pension to it. And at that name in the second row, an old man got slowly to his feet with a hand on his son's shoulder to steady himself, his eyes clouded white and fixed on nothing, and he turned his blind face toward the sound of Ruth's voice. "That's me," he said. "Jethro Coombs. I signed what they told me was my pension receipt. I couldn't see it weren't." His voice shook and steadied. "I've had folks tell me 2 years I was a fool to sign a thing I couldn't read. Ma'am, I have wanted every day since for one soul to say out loud, it weren't my foolishness, it were his thieving. And you just did. A woman I never met wrote my name in a book so it'd be true even after I'm gone." He couldn't say more. His son eased him back down into his chair, and the old man sat with his blind eyes wet and his jaw working, and there was not a dry face near him. Judge Cross let the room hold its silence a moment before he marked his paper. "Go on, Mrs. Mercer." She named the rest. Every name she spoke, someone in that dining room flinched or wept or nodded because they were not abstractions in a book. They were the neighbors sitting on the hotel's borrowed chairs, and with each one the room leaned harder against the man in the clean coat, and Silas Vane sat through all of it, with his banker's calm nailed in place, and only his eyes moved. Then she came to the Mercer note. "And the note against my son-in-law, Thomas Mercer," Ruth said. 3 years' wages advanced against a debt, signed with Thomas's mark, dated the 4th of June, 1884. She paused and let it land. "Thomas Mercer was buried on the 21st of May, 1884. I know the date. I dug in that dirt with my own 2 hands. So I would like someone in this room to explain to Judge Cross How a dead man made his mark on a note 2 weeks after his own funeral. The dining room erupted. Cross gavelled it down. Grady was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is precisely the danger of a hysterical witness. A clerical error in a date proves nothing. A wrong date is a mistake, not a forgery. My client has hundreds of notes. A scrivener transposed a figure. That is all the deceased woman's dramatics amount to a clerk's slip of the pen dressed up as a crime." "It's no slip." The voice came from the back of the room, and every head turned. Curtis Hale stood up with his hat in his hand, and his face was gray, but his voice held. "Beg pardon, Your Honor. My name's Curtis Hale. I rode for Silas Vane 18 months, and I'm here to say I stood in Vane's study and watched Dutch Reller forge Thomas Mercer's mark on that note with my own eyes, 3 weeks after we all knew Thomas was dead, because Vane said a dead man's debt was cleaner than a live one's. A dead man can't argue the figure." He swallowed hard. "I didn't hold the pen, but I stood there and I held my tongue, and I've come to hold it no longer. That note's a forgery. I watched it made." The room went to bedlam again, and this time it took Cross longer to still it. Grady's smooth voice climbed over the noise. "Your Honor, a disgruntled former employee dismissed for cause come to slander the man who let him go. The court cannot possibly—" "I wasn't dismissed," Hale said. "I quit, 3 days ago, in a wash when I couldn't chase a starving family 1 more mile. You can ask the 12 people in this room who saw me ride out of Vane's company." "He did," Sheriff Pike said from the door. "I've had a dozen tell me so." Judge Cross set down his gavel. He looked at the pages in front of him, and at the old woman in the kitchen chair, and at the forged note Grady had entered, and then he looked at Silas Vane, who had not spoken one word for himself the whole hearing. "Mr. Vane," the judge said, "your lawyer has argued that Mrs. Mercer's ledger is a fabrication invented to escape a debt. That is a serious charge, and if it's true, this woman belongs in a cell. But there is a simple way to settle it, and it is the way I intend to take." He folded his hands. "You keep your own books. Every man of business does. If Mrs. Mercer copied yours hers, and yours will match line for line, and no innocent fabrication on earth matches a real ledger by accident. If she invented hers, they'll differ, and I'll have her charged before sundown. So I am ordering your true ledger produced before this court, today, now." For the first time, Silas Vane spoke. "My ledgers are private business records, Your Honor. I decline to produce them. A man's books are his own." "They are ordinarily," Cross said. "But when a man asks a court to jail a woman as a forger, he opens his books to the test, or he withdraws the charge. You cannot call her a liar and then refuse the one proof that would hang her. Produce the ledger or the charge of fabrication is dismissed, and I proceed as though her copy is genuine. Choose Mr. Vane. I'll wait about as long as you waited on that porch." The whole room understood the trap the same instant Vane did. If he produced the book, it damned him. If he refused it, the court took Ruth's copy as true. He'd built his life on holding the only book that mattered, and now the book was a noose whichever way he pulled it. And Silas Vane, for the first time in the memory of anyone in that room, did not have an answer ready. Then Sheriff Pike stepped forward from the door. "Your Honor, on the matter of producing the ledger." He reached inside his coat and drew out a heavy leather-bound book worn at the corners, and he set it on the table in front of the judge with a weight that everyone heard. "I took the liberty. 2 nights ago I stood watch on the doctor's house, and about 3 in the morning, 2 of Vane's men were caught trying to break in after Mrs. Mercer's copy. That told me what Vane feared most was 2 books meeting. So last night I stopped fearing my own note and did my job. I got a warrant off Judge Cross's clerk the hour he rode in, and I rode out to the Vane place before dawn, and I opened the strong box in the study, and this is what was in it." He tapped the leather cover. "It's his true ledger. I haven't so much as read it. I brought it straight here sealed for the court to open first." The dining room did not erupt this time. It went dead silent, the silence of a whole town holding its breath at once, and into that silence, Judge Nathaniel Cross opened Silas Vane's true ledger and laid it side by side with Ruth Mercer's copied pages, and he began in a flat, clear voice to read them against each other. Turnbull, $200, 40 acres, matched. Dokes, 2 children. The sum, matched. The blind veteran's pension, matched. Line for line, name for name, figure for figure. The school teacher's copy and the cattle baron's secret book agreed, and with every matched line, the judge's voice grew colder and the room grew stiller, until he came at last to the Mercer note, dated the 4th of June, against a man buried on the 21st of May, entered in Vane's own hand, in Vane's own book. And Judge Cross stopped reading and closed both books and looked up. Mrs. Mercer, he said, did not invent a single figure. She copied them, faithfully. Which means every debt in this book that this court has just heard described is exactly what she said it was. He turned to Vane. Sir, I have sat the bench in this district 22 years, and I have never seen a plainer thing. You cheated these people with a pen. You dated a note against a corpse. You had a woman's children priced as property, and you asked me to jail the one honest witness who wrote it all down. Grady rose one last time. Your Honor, the custody order, Judge Harlan's order, stands regardless. It was lawfully. Judge Harlan's order, Cross said, was signed the same morning the warrant was sworn in, a matter Judge Harlan had no business hearing concerning a man Judge Harlan is known to dine with weekly. I will be forwarding this entire record to the state, and Owen Harlan can explain his signature to people above my pay. His order is void. He picked up his gavel. Here is my ruling, and it is final in this court. The debt against Abigail Mercer is declared fraudulent and is stricken. The note bearing Thomas Mercer's forged mark is void, and the matter of its forgery is referred for criminal charge against Silas Vane and the man Reller. The custody order is void. These children were never anyone's collateral and are not now. The estate of Silas Vane is placed under court supervision and full audit effective this hour, and every name in this ledger will be reviewed for restitution. He turned to the sheriff. Sheriff Pike, you'll take Mr. Vane into custody pending the forgery charge. No, Silas Vane said. Every eye came to him. He rose slowly from his chair, and for one moment the whole room tensed, as if he might do something wild, might reach for a gun, might make the ending the loud kind. But Silas Vane had never once in his life reached for a gun. He'd never had to. You've made a mistake, Vane said, and his voice was still calm, still level, still. That terrible, reasonable calm. But now there was nothing under it. The bottom had gone out of the man, and what was left was just a voice going through the motions of a power it no longer had. You've all made a mistake. I built half this county. The bank I use in Austin will hear of this. The men I know, the men you know, Cross said, will read your ledger in the state's report, same as everyone else, and discover they never knew you at all. Sit down, Mr. Vane. It's over. You weren't beaten by a gun or a mob. You were beaten by a school teacher's memory and a bad date. Sit down and let the sheriff do his work. And that was how Silas Vane went down. Not shot, not hanged, not dragged. He sat down in a hotel dining room while a one-legged woman watched from a kitchen chair, and Sheriff Amos Pike walked over and took him by the arm and led him out through a crowd that did not part in fear this time, but simply watched the way you'd watch weather that had finally passed. At the door, Pike stopped and turned to face the room, and he took the folded warrant for Abigail Mercer's arrest out of his coat, and he held it up so everyone could see it. For the record, Pike said, and for my own soul which needs it, this warrant is withdrawn. Abigail Mercer is charged with nothing, never should have been. And he tore it in half and in half again and let the pieces fall. The dining room came to part in noise then, cheering, weeping. The widow Turnbull with her apron up over her face, folks crowding toward Ruth's chair to shake the hand of the woman who'd remembered them all. Lily in her mother's lap looked up at all the noise and the strange smiling faces and tugged Abigail's sleeve and asked in her small clear voice that cut straight through the din. Mama is Mr. Caleb, the man who stopped the bad horses. And Abigail, laughing and crying, both at once said, Yes, baby, that's the man who stopped the bad horses. Caleb stood at the edge of it all, with his hat in his hands, and watched a family he'd known 4 days come out the other side of the thing whole, and he felt the strangest sensation. One he had to reach back 11 years to name. He felt glad. simply wholly glad standing in a crowded room with no grave in it. But later, when the crowd had thinned, when Ruth had been carried back to the doctor's to rest, and Samuel had fallen asleep across 2 chairs, and Lily had finally quieted, Abigail found Caleb out on the hotel gallery alone, and she came and stood beside him, and the gladness had gone out of her face, and something quieter and harder had taken its place. "We won," she said. "We did. Silas Vane's ruined, and my name's clean, and my babies are free." She wrapped her arms around herself. "And I've got no home, Caleb. I want to say that plain tonight while everybody's still cheering, because tomorrow they'll stop cheering and it'll still be true. The debt's gone, but so's the little I had. Vane took the land 2 years ago, and the court can't give back what was never lawfully mine to start with. I've got a mother who can't walk 2 children the clothes we're standing in, and a rag doll with a ledger sewn in it. That's the whole of what Abigail Mercer owns in this world." Her voice didn't break. She'd said it too plainly for that. "I'm free. I've never been so free in my life, and I have got absolutely no idea where my children are going to sleep next week." Caleb was quiet a while after she said it. He turned his hat over in his hands once, and then he set it on the gallery rail and looked out at the dark town, and when he spoke, he said the thing he'd been carrying since about the 2nd night on the porch. "They'll sleep at my place," he said. "If you'll have it. Caleb, let me say it the whole way before you answer, because I've thought about how to say it so it doesn't come out wrong and I'll only get it right the once." He faced her. "I've got 2,000 acres and a house I've kept like a tomb for 11 years, and not one living soul on the place, but me and a horse. I need hands. That's the plain truth of it. I've needed hands for years and never hired any, because hiring somebody meant somebody in the house, and I couldn't stand somebody in the house. Well, that's done. So here's my offer, and it's an offer, not a charity, and not a rescue. Wages. Real wages written down on paper in numbers your mother can read out loud to you, so you know I'm not cheating you a cent. You'd keep my books, your mother would. She's better at it than any man I could hire, and she's already threatened to. The boy earns his keep learning the stock. There's an empty cabin, the foreman's cabin, good and sound, its own door and its own stove, and it'd be yours. Yours, not lent, not watched. Yours to lock from the inside if you want." Abigail didn't answer right off. When she did, her voice had an edge she'd earned the hard way. "I left one man's roof because it came with chains," she said. "He gave me a cabin too once, called it generous. It came with a debt that grew in the dark and a paper I couldn't read, and a lock that only worked from his side. So you tell me, Caleb Whitaker, and you tell me true, what makes your roof any different from his? Because they start the same. A hard man and a kind one both start by offering a desperate woman a place to sleep." It was a fair question, maybe the fairest she'd ever asked anybody, and Caleb didn't flinch from it. "Because you can leave mine any day you choose," he said, "and still take what belongs to you." The words sat in the dark between them. Silas Vane's cabin was a trap that looked like a gift, Caleb went on. "Mine's a gift, and if it ever starts to feel like a trap, you walk out the door with your wages in your pocket, and your children by the hand, and your mother's books under your arm, and there is not one paper on this earth mine, or any judge's, that can say you owe me a thing for having stayed. That's the whole of the difference. A cruel man builds a door that only opens in. I'm telling you, the door opens both ways, and it always will. And the day it doesn't is the day I've turned into him, and if I ever do, you have my leave to shoot me with your own butter knife." He almost smiled. "You still got that butter knife?" Abigail let out a breath that was half a laugh. "I've still got it." "Keep it sharp then. Keep it as a promise I made you sober. You watch that door, Abigail. The day it stops opening out, you use it on me." She looked at him a long moment in the dark, and Caleb watched her weigh it. Watched 2 years of learning that every kindness had a hook in it, go up against a man who had just on purpose handed her the one weapon that would matter if he ever lied. "My mother will want to argue the wage figure," Abigail said at last. "She argues everything. It's how she knows she's alive." "I'm counting on it," Caleb said. "I'd be insulted if she didn't." That was the yes, though neither of them said the word, and both of them knew it. Ruth Mercer argued the wage figure the next morning from her kitchen chair with a pencil in her hand and a fierceness that had Doc Bell laughing in the next room. She talked Caleb up $2 a month on her own bookkeeping, and then when he agreed too fast, looked at him narrow-eyed and said, "You'd have gone 3. And Caleb admitted he would have, and she said, "Then we'll write 3, and you'll learn not to fold so easy in front of a woman with a pencil." And that was how Ruth Mercer negotiated her own wages up, and Caleb's respect for her along with it. They moved out to the ranch inside the week, the whole ragged lot of them, in a borrowed wagon. A far better wagon than the one that had died in the wash with Doc Bell's crutch, and Ruth propped in the bed, giving directions to a road she'd never traveled, and Samuel up front, where he'd ridden with Caleb the first day, and Lily on her mother's lap, clutching the rag doll with its secret seam, now empty the ledger, long since in a judge's hands. Caleb showed them the foreman's cabin first, and Abigail walked every corner of it in silence, testing the door, sliding the bolt, standing a long moment at the window, before she nodded once and said it would do, which from Abigail Mercer was a hymn of praise. But it was the main house Caleb walked into last alone that same evening, while the others got the cabin swept. There was a room at the back of it he had not opened in 11 years. He'd nailed it shut the winter after the fever, driven the nails himself, with a hammer he couldn't feel his hands around, and in the years since he had built his whole life on walking wide of that one door, the way Abigail had said her mother had walked wide of a grave in the middle of the floor. Behind it was a small bed and a smaller cradle, and a woman's dresses folded in a chest, and a child's shoes no bigger than a man's thumb. And every day for 11 years, Caleb Whitaker had eaten his supper 12 feet from all of it, and not looked. He stood in front of the door now, with a claw hammer in his hand. He hadn't planned to. He'd walked into the house meaning to light a lamp and go to bed, and his feet had brought him to the back hall, and the hammer had been on the shelf where it always was, and he'd picked it up before he knew he'd reached for it. The first nail screamed coming out. So did he, a little low in his chest, a sound he'd never made even at the graves. The second nail came easier. By the fourth he was weeping the way a man weeps who has forgotten how, and is doing it badly ugly and shaking, and he pulled every nail out of that door and threw them one by one down the hall, and when the last one was out, he stood there with his forehead against the wood, not yet able to open it, just standing, just letting the door be a door again instead of a tomb. That was where Abigail found him. She'd come up to the house to ask about firewood, and heard the hammering and the other sound under it, and she came down the back hall and stopped, and she did not say a word. She just came and stood beside him, close her shoulder against his arm, the way her son's had been that first day on the wagon seat. And she waited. "My daughter's shoes are in there," Caleb said when he could. "Ellen's. She never got to wear 'em. Mary made 'em too big so she'd grow into 'em, and she never—" His voice went. 11 years, Abigail. I nailed it shut so I wouldn't have to walk past it and see it empty. And I've walked past it empty every single day anyway. You were right in the wagon. You were right the first hour. It's no way to live." "You don't have to open it tonight," Abigail said softly. "I do, though." Caleb wiped his face with the heel of his hand, rough done with hiding it. "Because there's a little girl going to be living 40 feet from this door, and I will not have her grow up in a house with a nailed-shut room in it, wondering what's behind it, learning that grief is a thing you brick up and never speak of. My Ellen doesn't get to grow up. That's a fact I've fought 11 years and lost every time. But your Lily does. And she is not going to learn from me that love is something you seal in a room and lose the key to." He put his hand on the latch. "Mary would have hated what I did to this door. She'd have hated the nails worst of all. She was the kind that opened every window in the house the first warm day of the year." He opened the door. He didn't ask Abigail to come in, and she didn't. She let him have it alone. The small room with the small bed, and she went back up the hall and started carrying firewood, so he'd have the dignity of thinking she hadn't seen. And later that night when he came out to the porch, his face was scoured and calm in a way she'd not seen on him, and he sat down beside her and said, "I'm going to give Lily the little bed, if that's all right with you. It's a good bed. It ought to have a child sleeping in it. It's waited long enough." And Abigail, who understood exactly what he was handing her, said, "She'd be honored to sleep in Ellen's bed, Caleb. We'll tell her whose it was. She should know she's sleeping somewhere that was loved." They told her the next morning, both of them kneeling down to the child's level the way you do. Caleb did the telling, and he kept it simple and true, the way he'd learned a child wanted things. "There was a little girl lived here once," he said. "Her name was Ellen. She was smaller than you, and she got sick a long time ago, and she went to heaven before she got big. That was her bed. It's a real good bed, and it's been waiting a long time for somebody little to sleep in it. I'd like it to be you, if you want it." Lily considered this with the enormous seriousness of a 6-year-old. "Was she nice?" "I believe she would have been. She didn't get the chance to find out. But her mama loved her more than anything, so I expect she'd have been real nice." "Then I'll take good care of her bed," Lily said, as if accepting a solemn trust, which she was. And then, because she was 6 and not a saint, "Can I put my doll on the pillow?" "That's exactly what a bed like that is for," Caleb said, and had to stand up and go see to the horses for a minute, and Abigail let him go. That was the summer. The healing didn't come all at once because it never does, and Caleb had told the boy as much on the porch, and he'd have been a liar to expect different for himself. It came in pieces, small and daily, and each piece was its own small victory in a house that had gone 11 years without any. It came the morning Samuel sat a horse. For the first time, a gentle old mare, Caleb picked on purpose and got thrown inside. A minute landed hard in the dust and lay there with the wind knocked clean out of him while Abigail came running. But before she reached him, the boy was already up, already spitting dirt, already reaching for the reins. With a look on his face Caleb knew, and Caleb caught Abigail by the arm and held her back. "Let him get back on." He fell, and he's getting back on his own, and you running to him will teach him falling's the end of something. It's not. Watch. And they watched Samuel Mercer climb back into the saddle with his jaw set exactly like his mother's, and Caleb called out, "Heels down, son, and quit fighting her mouth." And the boy rode. He rode badly, and then less badly, and by August, he rode like he'd been born to it, and the day he first galloped the fence line whooping with his hat in his hand, Abigail had to sit down on the porch step because her knees wouldn't hold her watching her boy be a boy. It came the afternoon Lily laughed. She'd been the slowest to come back. The little girl she'd taken water, and then food, and then color, but the laughter had stayed gone, locked up somewhere. The hunger and the bad horses had driven it. She spoke but quiet, and she watched every room she entered the way old soldiers watch a tree line. And then one September afternoon, Caleb was mending tack on the porch, and a barn cat got itself tangled in a length of twine, and went cartwheeling across the yard, fighting the string like it was a snake, absurd and furious. And from the doorway came a sound nobody in that house had heard before, a child's laugh, high and helpless and delighted Lily Mercer, laughing so hard she had to hold the doorframe. Caleb put down the tack. He didn't trust his own face. Ruth, in her chair by the window, put her hand over her mouth, and Abigail stood frozen with a dish towel in her hands, and tears standing in her eyes, because it was the first time in longer than she could bear to count that her daughter had laughed like a child who believed the world was safe. "That's the sound," Ruth said quietly from her chair. "That right there. That's the sound I copied that ledger for. Not the courtroom, not the land. That sound. I'd have done it all again for that one sound." And it came the deepest of it in a thing that started as a small practical matter and turned into the quietest and most important hour of Caleb and Abigail's day. It began the second week when Caleb laid the first month's wages on the cabin table, and Abigail called her mother over to read the figure, and Caleb watched her do it, watched a grown woman sharp as a tack brave past reckoning, have to ask her mother what her own wage slip said. And he understood in a way he hadn't fully before how Silas Vane had done it, not with a gun, with a paper and a woman who couldn't read it. "I could teach you," Caleb said that evening, careful because it was a tender thing to offer. "To read, if you wanted. Your mother won't always be at your elbow, and you shouldn't have to send for her to know what your own name's signed to. A woman who can read her own papers can't be Silas Vaned. Not ever again. That's a fact." Abigail's face did a complicated thing. I'm 1 and 30 years old, Caleb. Folks learn as children. Folks learn when somebody sits down with them and doesn't laugh, Caleb said. I'm no school teacher. Your mother's the school teacher, and she'd have you reading scripture by Christmas and crying over the effort. I'd just be a man at a table with a slate who's got nowhere better to be of an evening. No shame in it. Nobody watching. And the day you can read a contract cover to cover is the day no man on God's earth can ever cheat you with a pen again. So it became their evenings. After the children were down and Ruth had gone to her rest, Caleb and Abigail would sit at the main house table with a slate and a stub of chalk, and the reader, Doc Bell, dug out of a trunk, and Caleb patient in this, the way he was patient with a green horse, never once raising his voice, never once letting her feel small, taught Abigail Mercer her letters. She was fierce at it, and furious when she stumbled, and she threw the chalk across the room more than once, and Caleb picked it up more than once, and set it back in her hand without a word. And slowly, the way the boy learned the horse and the little girl learned to laugh, the woman learned her letters until one night in September, she read a full page aloud, halting and triumphant, and looked up with her eyes shining and said, I could have read the paper that night. If I'd known my letters 2 years ago, I'd have read what I was signing, and none of this, and stopped, because none of this would also have meant, none of this porch, none of this table, none of this man. You'd have kept your land and never met me. Caleb finished for her gently. I've thought of that too, and I'm a selfish enough man to be glad you couldn't read and ashamed enough to wish you could have both at once. But you can read now. That's the part that matters. Nobody vains a woman who reads her own contracts. It was at that table more than anywhere over chalk and a borrowed reader in the plainest and least romantic hour of the day that the thing between them stopped being gratitude and became something with roots. Not in the rescue, in the 10,000 small patient minutes after it. She learned his silences, and he learned her fierceness, and they built letter by letter a thing that no court had ordered, and no debt secured, and no man could ever call in. And the rest of the healing came in 100 smaller ways. Nobody wrote down in the wages paid in full. On the first of every month, counted out where Ruth could check them, and now where Abigail could read them too. In the door of the foreman's cabin that Abigail stopped bolting somewhere around the middle of August without ever deciding to. In the way Caleb's silent house filled up by inches with the noise of a family until the silence he'd guarded for 11 years was so completely gone he couldn't remember why he'd ever wanted it. But a hard land does not let a good thing go unchallenged, and the town had not finished with them. It came to a head at the harvest social in Bitter Fork the first time the whole family went to town together. Ruth wanted to go. She'd been cooped up healing all summer, and she declared she'd not spend her one life hiding from folks who'd whispered. And so Caleb hitched the wagon, and they all went, and it was fine, better than fine. Half the county came up to shake Ruth's hand and thank her, until a knot of the churchwomen got to talking near the cider table, loud enough to be heard. Living right there on his land in his cabin, a widow, and him a widower, and no ring between them, and everybody just pretending it's about wages. What kind of example for the children? Stole from the man, and now she's got the whole ranch. Clever's the word for it, if clever's what we're calling it these days. Abigail heard it. She went still and old the way she had at the mercantile, and she set down her cider and reached for Lily's hand to gather the children and go, because she'd spent 2 years learning there was no winning against a whisper. Caleb heard it too. He didn't go still. He crossed to the cider table, and he took off his hat, that old Western courtesy. The tip of the hat, the thing a man did to show respect, and he held it against his chest and spoke to the churchwomen in a voice pitched to carry but gentle without heat, which was worse for them than shouting. Ladies, I'd like to set your minds at ease since you've been kind enough to worry over my household in public. He waited until the whole social had gone quiet, until every ear was his. Mrs. Mercer keeps my books and my house, and her mother keeps my accounts, and her boy works my stock, and they are paid honest wages written down in numbers, and they live behind a door that locks from the inside her side, not mine. That's the arrangement. Now I know it troubles some of you that a widow and a widower share a piece of ground without a preacher's say-so. So I'll tell you my intentions plain in front of God and the cider, and then it's nobody's business ever again." He turned and he looked across the room at Abigail, and he said it to her as much as to them. "I intend to court that woman, properly, slow, with her mother's blessing and her children's knowing, and a preacher at the far end of it, if she'll have me, which she may well not, because she is the proudest, stubbornest, bravest human being I have ever met, and she does not need me, and that is exactly why I'd be a fool not to try." He put his hat back on. "But I have not asked her yet, because she has been through a thing that would break most people, and a man does not press a courtship on a woman who's still catching her breath. So there's your example for the children, ladies, a man waiting on a woman's own time and asking nobody's leave but hers. You're welcome to it." The social was dead silent. And then the widow Turnbull standing near the church, women set down her own cup and said loud, "Well, I think that's about the finest thing I ever heard said at a cider table." And somebody laughed, and the tightness broke, and the church women found urgent business elsewhere. But Abigail had gone white, then red, and she took the children out to the wagon, and Caleb found her there 10 minutes later, sitting on the wagon seat with her back straight and her hands knotted in her lap. "You shouldn't have said all that," she said. "Now the whole county's got us married before you've even—" "I meant every word of it, and I'll say it again anywhere you like." Caleb stopped. "But I'm sorry I said it there before I said it to you. That was wrong of me. You should have heard it first in private from me, not overheard it across a room full of gossips. I let my temper make your choice public, and that's a thing Silas Vane would do, and I'm ashamed of it." He took off his hat again, this time just for her. "So I'll say it right later when it's yours to answer and nobody's watching. Tonight you just heard a man lose his temper defending you. Don't mistake it for the question. The question comes when you're ready for it and not one day before." And Abigail, who had braced her whole life against men who took, sat looking at a man who kept apologizing for giving too much too loud, and did not know what to do with him at all. The question, though, had to wait longer than either of them planned, because in October, the twist came that neither of them saw. It came in an envelope brought out from town by Deputy Toomey, bearing the seal of the state court, and the results of the audit of the estate of Silas Vane. Ruth read it aloud at the kitchen table, her pencil tapping each line, and her voice changed as she went. The estate was being broken up for restitution. Every soul in that ledger was owed. The Dokes children had been found alive at the Rutherford mill and were being brought home. The widow Turnbull would have her 40 acres back. Jethro Coombs, the blind veteran, would have his pension restored with interest. And Ruth's pencil stopped, and she read it twice before she read it out. The fraudulent seizure of the Mercer homestead was reversed. The land ordered returned to Abigail Mercer, free and clear, along with a cash restitution for 2 years of stolen wages and the value of what Vane had stripped from the place. "Give it here, Mama." Abigail's voice was strange. "I want to read it myself." Ruth handed the letter across, and Abigail took it, and she bent over the state court's cramped clerk hand, and read it slowly, her finger moving under the words the way Caleb had taught her at the slate, but reading it, her own eyes on her own name. And when she came to the line that said, "The land was hers, free and clear," in her name, she read it a second time silently, and then set the paper down with a hand that was not quite steady. "2 years ago, I made my mark on a paper I couldn't read and lost everything," she said. "And just now, I read a paper with my own eyes that gave it all back. Nobody read it to me. I read it." She looked up, and there were tears in it, but no grief, something else entirely. "That's the thing, isn't it? That's the whole thing. I'll never again in my life not know what a paper says." The table went quiet. "You've got your land back," Caleb said. He said it evenly, but Abigail heard what it cost him to say it evenly. "Your own place, and money to work it. Free and clear in your name, no man's mark on it but yours. Caleb, you've got everything back that he took." Caleb stood up from the table. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room. And when he spoke again, his voice was careful, the voice of a man holding something level that wanted to spill. "That's what I told you that first night on the gallery, that you could leave any day and take what belongs to you. Well, Now everything that belongs to you is a day's ride from here, waiting with your name on the deed and money in the bank to stock it. Your own roof. No wages, no foreman's cabin, no whispering church women, no— He stopped himself. No obligation to anybody, least of all me. Nobody said anything. Samuel looked from his mother to Caleb and back the way children do when the grown-ups have gone strange. Lily hummed to her doll, not understanding. And Ruth Mercer set down her pencil and watched her daughter with the still, sharp attention of a woman who has taught 40 years of children to make their own hard choices and knows better than to make this one for her. "Say the rest of it, Caleb," Abigail said quietly. "There's no rest of it. It's your land. You should have it." "There's a rest of it, and you're chewing on it by the window like a man with a stone in his boot. Say it." Caleb turned around. "The rest of it," he said, "is that I don't want you to go. That's the rest of it. I've spent all summer building a family in a house I kept like a grave for 11 years, and you're the reason it stopped being a grave, and your children are the reason I open the windows now, and your mother is the reason I laugh at my own supper table, and I do not want to watch that wagon go down my road one more time in my life. That's the rest of it. But I wasn't going to say it. I wasn't ever going to say it, because the whole entire point of everything I promised you that first night was that you'd never again stay anywhere because you were trapped or broke or afraid or owing. And now, you're none of those things. Now you're free. So now and only now is the first time I could ever honestly ask you to stay and know it was your choice and nothing else." He spread his hands helpless with it. "So I'm not going to ask. It's your land. It's your money. It's your life, finally, all the way yours. You do with it exactly what you want, Abigail, and whatever that is. I'll hitch the wagon myself, and I'll be glad for you because glad for you is the only kind of love that isn't a cage." The whole kitchen held its breath, and Abigail Mercer stood up from the table, and she walked across the room, and she stopped in front of Caleb Whitaker, and she looked up at him with the same burnt-out, unbroken eyes she'd turned on him over a rope harness in the dust a lifetime ago that summer. "You want to know why I'm staying," she said. "And it isn't the ranch, and it isn't the wages, and it isn't that I'm scared to be alone because God knows I ran a wagon across a desert alone, and I could work my own land alone if I had to." She took a breath. "I'm staying because you were the first man in 2 years, the first man maybe ever, who looked at my children like they were worth saving. Not worth using, not worth pitying, worth saving." Silas Vane looked at them and saw collateral. Half that town looked at them and saw a thief's brats. You looked at a little girl's hand hanging off a wagon and put your rifle down. Her voice went rough and held. "I'll keep my land. It's mine and I fought for it and I'll never sign it to a soul. But I'm going to work it from right here, married to the man who opened a nailed-shut room so my Lily wouldn't grow up scared of grief. If he'll still have a woman who owns her own 40 acres and intends to keep them." Caleb Whitaker, who had faced down a cattle baron and a sheriff and a mob without his voice shaking, could not for a moment find it now. "They're a preacher at the far end of that," he managed. "There'd better be," Abigail said. "I've got a mother who'll want to check his figures." And from the table, without looking up from her pencil, Ruth Mercer said, "Blessing granted, and about time. And if you two are going to carry on like this, you'll do it after I've balanced October, because I will not have my sums thrown off by romance." Samuel grinned. Lily, catching the feeling in the room without the sense of it, laughed her new laugh. And Caleb reached out and took Abigail's hand, not to hold her, not to keep her, just to hold it, the free and open hand of a woman who had chosen, and the house that had been a tomb went on being a home. They were married that fall under a warm Texas evening that had no business being so warm so late, and the whole reformed county came, and the widow Turnbull cried, and Curtis Hale stood at the back with his hat in his hands, and was by the end forgiven because Abigail found she had it in her after all. Doc Bell gave the bride away on account of nobody else being tall enough to do it right. Ruth kept the books of the wedding itself down to the cost of the cake and pronounced it under budget. Samuel stood up beside Caleb as best man 10 years old and grave as a judge, and when the preacher asked who supported this union, the boy said, "I do," a beat before anyone else, and turned red, and everyone pretended not to notice. And late that night, when the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Lily in Ellen's little bed with the doll Samuel in a room of his own for the first time in his life, Caleb and Abigail sat on the porch under the stars, and Caleb thought about the morning. It had all started the empty grain sack and the rifle, and the sound of a woman dragging her whole world across his land because she'd rather bleed than beg. "You ever think," Abigail said, "how close you came to just riding on catching a thief, calling the sheriff, going home?" "Every day," Caleb said. "I think about it every single day. A man could have done it. Most would have. Seen a woman with a wagon full of trouble and figured it wasn't his to carry." He looked out at the dark land that wasn't silent anymore. That's the thing nobody tells you about a hard country. It's not the law that makes it merciful. We had law. Vane had more law than anybody, judges and warrants and papers by the stack. Law didn't save you. Law's just a tool, and a cruel man picks it up same as a kind one. He took her hand. A hard land gets made merciful one way, and one way only. Somebody comes along who won't ride past. That's all it ever takes. That's all it ever took. One person who looks at suffering in the dust and gets down off the horse. "You make it sound simple," Abigail said. "It is simple. It's just not easy. Those aren't the same thing." Caleb turned her hand over in his, the free hand of a woman who'd read her own deed. Simple's knowing the right thing when a starving woman turns around in the road and won't beg. Easy would have been riding home. I nearly did the easy thing. I want you to know that tonight of all nights, I sat that horse a good long minute at the top of the rise and told myself it wasn't mine to carry. Every good thing I've got now, I almost rode past. Our whole life was about 1 minute where I could have gone either way. But you didn't. I didn't. And I'll spend the rest of my days grateful to whatever it was in me that got down off that horse, because it wasn't wisdom and it wasn't courage. It was just, I couldn't do it. I looked at that little hand hanging off the wagon and I could not make myself ride past it. His voice went low. "Turns out that's the whole of a man's character, Abigail. Not the big speeches. Just whether he can ride past a hand in the dust or whether he can't. I found out I couldn't. Best thing I ever learned about myself, and I learned it from you." Abigail leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a long while neither of them said anything, and the warm night held them, and the house behind them breathed with sleeping children. Caleb Whitaker had raised his rifle at a thief that summer morning. By sunset, he had cut the rope from her shoulders, and by fall, he had given her his name and taken hers into his heart. And he understood at last the thing his grief had spent 11 years hiding from him. That the man who refuses to ride past another's suffering does not only save the ones he stops for, he saves himself. And there is no law in any book that can do that work, and no rich man alive who can undo it. And that is the whole and finished truth of Caleb Whitaker's life.